Chapter 845. After another 3 days, the Bloodpayers Hall sent news that Jinjian Hall had arrived at Flat Mountain Ridge with spray of flowers. At this time, Chu Fian and Chu Feiling had already set off. Divine Dr. Chu had no choice but to go personally. Jinjian Hall was an organization of bloodpayers. There were only 5 of them, but all of them were not ordinary. Moreover, they were brothers from the same mother, and they were ranked beyond the top 200 in the Bloodpayers Hall. But this organization was famous for one thing. They were despicable, shameless, insidious, and cunning. Jinjian Hall was best at robbing other bloodpayers to collect rewards. Or after other bloodpayers collected their rewards, they would kill them and rob them of the purple crystals. This was the most despicable thing for the people in the martial world. If you have the ability, go find it yourself, fight for it yourself. What kind of ability was it to rob other people's labor? This was also considered as robbing bloodpayers. After all, the nature of bloodpayers' organization determined its people's purple crystals and items. They never cared about who submitted the task. As long as you completed the task and got the item, the reward would be given to you. Over the years, Jinjian Hall was notorious. But these 5 people were extremely slippery. They would escape if they couldn't win. But each of them had the ability to escape. No one could do anything to them. So they were free for the time being. Moreover, the 5 of them were despicable and arrogant. They were not willing to submit to anyone, including the big clans that ruled the heavens. They did not even put them in their eyes. Of course, when they saw the people of the big families, Jinjian Tang was definitely more obedient than a dog, wagging its tail and drooling its face, trying its best to flatter them. But as soon as the person left, they would curse the whole world. The catchphrase of Nangong Shifeng, the boss of Jinjian Hall, was, "Are the big clans all stupid? Have these bastards lived for more than 10,000 years in vain? They don't have any knowledge and courage. For example, this matter. Are they stupid? For example, this matter. How stupid must they be to do it like this? If I'm from a big clan, what will I do?" This guy always made comments after the event. He would only talk nonsense after he understood the cause and effect of everything. Finally, he would add, "I'm really speechless." It never occurred to him that everything he said had already happened. It had already been announced to the world. Even an idiot would know that he shouldn't have done this back then. But why didn't he say it before it happened? Typical belated advice. When someone from a big clan came to settle the score with him, Nangong Shifeng immediately kowtowed and begged for mercy. Tears and snot flowed down his face. He kept repenting and only begged for his life. But after that, he still behaved the same way later on. The people of Jianghu gave this guy a saying, "A person who is too shameless is invincible." Not only did he have the word Lei Feng carved on his face, there was even a tattoo of a dog's head on his forehead. Thus, he was called the 3-headed snake. And 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. After offending the Yi clan, he was castrated by the Yi clan. Because of this, its nickname changed to 2-headed snake. If one of its 3 heads was cut off, wouldn't it be 2 heads? Furthermore, Nangong Shifeng's character must have been soaked in the latrine. It was said that this guy's wife ran away with another man, and he wore a few green hats. In addition, he was castrated, which led to his psychological perversion, and Jinjian Hall was the official name. But when people mentioned these people, they would call them the Silver Sword Hall. But Chu Yang naturally didn't know the whole story. But when he knew that it was Jinjian Hall who got spray of flowers, he investigated this organization. He also knew the style of this organization. Naturally, he was on guard. As for Jinjian Hall's exorbitant demand of 30,000 purple crystals, he wasn't surprised. Under the guidance of the Bloodpayers Hall, the 5 people of the Jinjian Hall finally met with Chu Yang. Their strength was really not weak. They had all reached the monarch level. When Chu Yang saw these 5 people, he was speechless. As expected, Nangong Shifeng's face was covered. But seeing his 4 younger brothers was the same as seeing him. His 4 younger brothers didn't cover their faces. Each of them looked exactly the same. Triangular eyes, broom-like eyebrows, bulbous nose, toad mouth, protruding ears, withered yellow hair that curled up sparsely. Their heads were like large single cloves of garlic, and there was a sharp tip on top. At this moment, Chu Yang lowered his head, and looked at his crotch with uncertainty. Damn it. Did that thing run out and become a spirit? You're the buyer? You need spray of flowers urgently? The boss of Jinjian Hall, Nangong Shifeng, had his face covered, but his domineering tone couldn't be concealed. His eyes flashed with cold light like a viper's as he sized Chu Yang up. Originally, when blood payers offered a reward, the buyer and seller would never meet face to face. But Chu Yang's reward was 10,000 purple crystals, while Jinjian Hall wanted 30,000 purple crystals. The difference was too big, so they came to discuss with the buyer. For safety reasons, Chu Yang covered his face. It's urgent, but it depends on the price, Chu Yang said lightly. Even if I were to sell everything I have, I would only be able to offer a reward of more than 10,000 purple crystals. If you can't offer the purple crystals, you still want spray of flowers. Nangong Shifeng snorted and said, For a flower like you, we've suffered a lot before we managed to get it for you. You want to use 10,000 purple crystals to dismiss us? Do you think we're beggars? The enforcer of the Blood Payers Hall frowned and said, 10,000 purple crystals is already quite a lot. Nangong, don't go too far. Nangong Shifeng smiled and said, Big brother, don't be angry. We also want to get the greatest benefit. After all, this trip is extremely tiring. It's all hard-earned money. Of course, everyone's hard work is inevitable. So I'll also add some rewards at my discretion. But how much does this big brother want? At such a critical juncture, Chu Yang didn't want to complicate matters. He only wanted to quickly hand over the money with one hand and end this matter with the other. He really felt a little nauseous looking at these five guys. Being ugly isn't a sin. But if you're ugly and still insist on thinking that you're extraordinary and that you're an excellent duke of the secular world, then that's too nauseating. So this expert doesn't lack purple crystals? Nangong Shifeng's cold eyes flashed. I still have some. As long as it's not too much, I'll accept it. Chu Yang smiled lightly. 50,000 purple crystals. Nangong Shifeng smiled and stretched out 5 fingers. Nangong, you said 30,000 purple crystals just now. The enforcer of the Blood Payers Hall was furious. Big brother enforcer. The 5 of us almost lost our lives to snatch these from the wolf's den. Look at the wounds on 3rd and 4th brother's legs that were bitten by the wolves. We almost lost our lives. Nangong Shifeng said pitifully. It's too much. Chu Yang said emotionlessly. I don't have so many purple crystals. Then how much do you want? Nangong Shifeng blinked. 20,000 at most. Chu Yang said. Absolutely not. Nangong Shifeng's voice suddenly became fierce. This buyer, are you playing with us brothers? Chu Yang frowned and said. I don't have so many purple crystals. Do you want me to rob you? 50,000 purple crystals. Don't even think about doing this business if there's one less. Nangong Shifeng said viciously. At most, I'll destroy this flower and we'll go our separate ways. Then do as you wish. Chu Yang stood up. I don't want this flower anymore. If you want to kill someone, you don't have to use this flower. Goodbye. Chu Yang walked out without any reluctance. He's had enough. You don't want face. Then don't blame me, King of Hell Chu, for being ruthless. Seeing this buyer turn around and walk away without any reluctance, Nangong Shifeng was dumbfounded. He didn't expect that this guy, who had offered a reward in the Blood Payers Hall, obviously needed this flower very much. Now that they couldn't reach an agreement, he actually didn't want it anymore. What was this saying? How could Nangong Shifeng bear to destroy a flower? This was a huge fortune. If I can't sell it to you, can I sell it to others? But obviously others couldn't pay such a high price. Not to mention 20,000 purple crystals. They couldn't even reach 10,000 purple crystals. Because this thing was definitely not worth such a high price. For this kind of thing, only those who urgently needed it would pay such a high price. How could Nangong Shifeng not know this principle? Thinking of this, Nangong Shifeng wished he could give himself 2 slaps. 20,000 purple crystals wasn't a small amount. If he had known this, he would have sold it for 20,000 purple crystals. This, big brother, what is this saying? This. Nangong Shifeng turned around and looked at the enforcer of the Blood Payers Hall, saying with grievance, this person offered a reward in the Blood Payers Hall, but he doesn't want it anymore. This. This is not taking the Bloodpayer's Hall seriously. The enforcer said coldly. He really doesn't take the enforcers of the entire southeast region seriously. So what if he doesn't take them seriously? This person was the second in charge of the Bloodpayer's Hall. That day when Han Shaoran supported the Chu clan, he was also there. And Han Shaoran even specially instructed the two in charge of the Bloodpayer's Hall. Definitely. Don't let anything happen to this young master. Since Han Shaoran had already instructed so, then this young master. Needless to say how to serve him. Upon hearing the enforcer's words, Nangong Shifeng was instantly dumbfounded. He didn't take the enforcers of the entire southeast region seriously? Nangong Shifeng instantly wanted to cry. Damn, could it be the main figure of the Shao clan? So, I've offended the Shao clan today. Big brother, please say something. Nangong Shifeng almost cried. 20,000 it is. The enforcer spread out his hands and said, I can't help even if I want to. Nangong, let me remind you. This person isn't someone you can afford to offend. Don't have any crooked ideas. You're on your own. As he said, the enforcer sighed and disappeared in a flash. Even if Nangong Shifeng really had crooked ideas previously, he absolutely didn't dare to do so now. He stood there as if he had lost his parents, as if he had lost his soul. Big brother, you're too greedy. You should have sold it for 20,000 purple crystals. 20,000 purple crystals have already exceeded the real value by several times. His few brothers obviously had the same character as him, and instantly started to give advice after the fact. Nangong Shifeng said with a long face, How would I know it would turn out like this? Chapter 846. Book 7, Chapter 122. Do you understand? Translator. Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios Nangong Shifeng, and the other four left the flat mountain ridge and sighed. The topic was, if I had known, I would have done that earlier. But it was too late to say anything now. Since things have come to this, let's leave quickly. One of the five brothers frowned and said, This is the only time we didn't rob. We fought so hard against a pack of wolves, and only managed to pick a flower. We thought it was a rare commodity that we could hoard. Who would have thought that we would travel thousands of miles to the southeast to offend someone? And from the looks of it, we offended a big shot. Yes. If this person comes to rob us, we'll be in trouble. Another one suddenly realized. They were all robbers, so they were very cautious about this. We really went for wool and came back on credit. Nangong Shifeng said dejectedly. Forget it, let's go to the Zhuge family and sell this medicine to the medicine banquet. I think we'll earn a lot of purple crystals. The five of them quickened their pace and rushed out of the flat mountain ridge like a gust of wind. They crossed a mountain and turned a corner. Seeing the endless forest in front of them, they heaved a sigh of relief. We're finally out. I was really afraid of being intercepted. One of them wiped his sweat. Yes, you guys have come out. However, this should be enough. A cold voice rang out. Along with this voice, a bleak and vicissitude aura suddenly filled the air. The five of them were shocked. They turned around and saw a figure in black standing under a pine tree in front of them. Looking at his posture, he had been waiting for a long time. It was the sword spirit in charge of the body, waiting here to rob them. Even if I can't buy it, can't I rob it? It's you. Nangong Shifeng recognized at a glance that this was the masked man in black just now. He was scared out of his wits. Just from this bleak and vicissitude aura, he knew that he had hit the nail on the head. Feeling the terrifying aura that was like a mountain pressing down on him, he was even more sure that the person he had offended not only had a strong background, but also had a terrifying cultivation. Just by sensing this aura, he understood one thing. If he made a move, he would definitely die without a doubt. The most important reason why the Jinjian Hall had existed for such a long time was that his boss was smooth and slick. When met with a soft approach, he would be hard. When he wanted to be hard, he would be soft. This was the supreme law of the heavenly layer. It's me. The sword spirit chuckled. What a coincidence to meet you again. Senior, what do you want? Nangong Shifeng asked cautiously. Nothing much, the sword spirit said. I miss you. So I wanted to come and have a chat with you. Is that okay? Nangong Shifeng took a step back and was tongue-tied. Senior, we can discuss it again. Actually, 20,000 purple crystals isn't something that isn't negotiable. The sword spirit chuckled. But I can get it without spending a single purple crystal. Do you believe me? I believe you. Nangong Shifeng nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice. Big brother, you're brilliant, handsome, and elegant. You'll definitely succeed in whatever you want to do. Don't say that you didn't spend a single purple crystal to get this flower. I think you don't even need to waste any effort. Someone will send this flower to you with purple crystals. The sword spirit's eyes lit up. You're giving me purple crystals? Is there such a good thing? Nangong Shifeng said flatteringly. Yes, big brother. Actually, with your unparalleled cultivation, you only need to say a word, and we'll gather enough purple crystals, even if we have to break our legs. We'll also have to send over thousands of mountains and rivers to you. The sword spirit said excitedly. Really? I don't know how many purple crystals they'll give me. Nangong Shifeng cried instantly. Senior, how many purple crystals do you think is appropriate? The sword spirit pondered for a while and said, Sigh, it's so. 20,000 purple crystals should be enough. I'll kindly accept it. Nangong Shifeng and his brothers twitched their bulbous noses at the same time, as if 5 heads of garlic were shaking at the same time. They could have earned 20,000 purple crystals, but now they had to pay 20,000 purple crystals? What kind of explanation was this? Nangong Shifeng grinned and said tearfully, But if I don't bring it with me now? Don't bring it with you? The sword spirit was instantly furious. He was here to kill and rob, so how could he show mercy? Are you fooling me? At this moment, in the entanglement space, Chu Yang beamed with joy. Wait, I'll deal with them. The sword spirit was startled. Why? Chu Yang smiled. Don't you see that these 5 people are very tactful? If they were other monarch-level experts, they would have already become corpses. But if you continue to talk like this, they won't die. The sword spirit said. I'll slash them with my sword. You'll really die with your sword. Chu Yang rolled his eyes and said, It's a pity to kill these 5 people. Coincidentally, the medicine banquet is short of people, and I need information. It's rare that they're so obedient. The sword spirit disappeared silently, and Chu Yang regained his consciousness silently. Nangong Shifeng suddenly felt that the strong pressure and vicissitudes of life, as well as the terrifying murderous aura, had disappeared together. Although the black-robed man was still standing in front of him, he obviously didn't want to kill anymore. He was so happy that he wanted to cry. He choked and said, Senior is really magnanimous, boo-hoo. Chu Yang sighed. It's not easy for you too. Yes. Nangong Shifeng nodded repeatedly. Surviving in the martial world, the 5 of us brothers are not loved by our uncles and uncles. It's really hard to earn a living. Well, where's that flower? Chu Yang dragged his tone. It's here. Nangong Shifeng no longer had the imposing manner of wanting to destroy the flower. He hurriedly took out a small jade box from his bosom and presented it to Chu Yang with both hands. Put it down, let's talk. Chu Yang didn't take it. He gestured for Nangong Shifeng to put it down on the ground. Only then did he sit down on the roots of the pine tree. Nangong Shifeng considerately moved a flat big rock and wiped it clean with his sleeves. Then, he took off his coat and laid it on the flat surface of the rock. He nodded and bowed. Please take a seat. His expression was flattering, just like a dog that was wagging its head and tail. Yes, you're quite sensible. Chu Yang sat down steadily and crossed his legs. I heard that you don't like the big clans? Chu Yang's main point was this. In terms of character, this guy would have been killed by Chu Yang long ago. But these guys were very good at currying favor. They bullied the weak and feared the strong. They were very slippery. Chu Yang immediately wanted to use them for other purposes. Not only don't I like the big clans, Nangong Shifeng said angrily. We can't make a living because the big clans forced us. He was smart enough to understand the meaning of Chu Yang's words. Yes, I also don't like the big clans. I heard that your power was erased by the Yi clan? Chu Yang asked. Who did it? The veins on Nangong Shifeng's forehead bulged. It's that transvestite Yi Shiyu. I offended him last time. He ordered people to catch me, and then just cut me off with a sword. How did you offend him? Chu Yang was full of interest. It's a long story. That time, someone mentioned the matter of the Yi clan's daughter. So I said sarcastically that if I knew that Ling Hanwu would quit, I would have let a pair of lovers be together. But now, he killed his own subordinate, and didn't get to cozy up to Yi Shiyu. In the end, Yi Shiyu heard it. Nangong Shifeng slapped his own mouth. I'm just a cheap talker. You are indeed a cheap talker. Chu Yang felt the same way. This guy's problem was indeed caused by that bad habit of his. If I knew earlier, how good would it be? It's all because of the hindsight. Do you want to take revenge? Chu Yang asked. Even in my dreams. Nangong Shifeng said affirmatively. Then he said dejectedly. But now that we are like this, how can we talk about revenge? That transvestite Yi Shiyu is vicious. Not only did he cripple me, he also made me unable to see anyone. He tore off the scarf covering his face. Take a look. He tattooed the word idiot on my forehead. And even drew a dick on it. If it weren't for the fact that I was worried about my 4 brothers, I would have killed myself long ago. I'm also a man. When Chu Yang saw this shape, he almost spurted out. I didn't expect that transvestite Yi clan was also a talent. He was actually so mischievous. He was the one who did it both times? Chu Yang felt strange. Yes, once. Nangong Shifeng wanted to cry but had no tears. I've been keeping it a secret. But later, that transvestite saw that no one knew about it, and actually sent people to spread the news that I was done by him. Chu Yang held back his laughter and muttered, It's just a tattoo. It's easy to get rid of it. Nangong Shifeng widened his eyes in surprise and blinked his eyes. Chu Yang said, All of you come over. The 5 brothers came over, not knowing what was going on. Chu Yang's hands were as fast as lightning. Pa 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 pa, he tapped on each of their chests. The 5 of them only felt a pain in their chests, which disappeared immediately. Chu Yang took out 5 pills and said, Everyone take 1 pill. From now on, you'll work for me. His voice became heavy. As long as you do your best to work for me, not only will I get rid of your tattoo, I'll also help you take revenge and seek justice from Yi Shiyu. I'll also help you recover your lower body. Nangong Shifeng jumped up in surprise and said in a trembling voice, Really? Chu Yang snorted and took out a bottle of liquid medicine. He said, Don't move. With a flash of sword light, a thin layer of skin on Nangong Shifeng's forehead floated down, and the tattoo fell off entirely. Before Nangong Shifeng could scream, he felt a cooling sensation. Half of the liquid medicine had been spilled on his wound. Immediately, he felt an indescribable itch and comfort. Then, the other half of the bottle was stuffed into his mouth. Vitality spring water? Nangong Shifeng knew that he was saved. He was so excited that his whole body trembled. He snatched the pill from Chu Yang's hand and swallowed it. When the other 4 heard the words vitality spring water, they swallowed the pills without any instructions. Elder, what do you want us to do? Just tell us. Nangong Shifeng said. The medicine banquet will be held when the flowers bloom next spring. Chu Yang said lightly. I need all of you to go there first. Just do this and that. Nangong Shifeng nodded repeatedly as Chu Yang explained. Take this half of the dagger. When the time comes, someone will appear at the medicine banquet to look for you with the other half of the dagger. As long as you do what I ask you to do, the person holding the other half of the dagger will give you the antidote for today's poison, and will also cure your unspeakable illness. Chu Yang took out a thumb-long broken dagger and handed it to Nangong Shifeng. He said lightly, Do you understand? Yesterday, 1,100 votes to make up for yesterday. I reckon that it will continue to explode in the next few days. So please support me with monthly votes. Chapter 847. Understood. Nangong Shifeng carefully took over half of the dagger, wrapped it up carefully, and put it in his bosom. He didn't look uncomfortable from being coerced. Instead, he was full of excitement. Nangong Shifeng, don't you feel awkward? Chu Yang asked. Your acupoints were sealed by me first, and then you took my poison. No matter what happens, you'll die without a complete corpse. Don't you feel aggrieved after being tempted by me and promising you great benefits to do things for me? Nangong Shifeng's bloody face actually revealed a smile. He said, Not at all. Not at all. He didn't show any flattery in his words. His tone was solemn and serious, as if he was sincere. Why? Chu Yang was a little interested. He really wanted to understand the mentality of this guy, who had just been subdued by him. This would determine his future development. After all, Chu Yang really didn't have anyone to use now. That's why he caught these 5 people. If he had other principles, he wouldn't be willing to use such disreputable people. In Chu Yang's heart, he was still inclined to abandon these 5 people if they were to follow him all the time, or to be abandoned according to the situation. Coercion. Actually, when have we not been coerced in this world? Nangong Shifeng smiled a little sadly. All along, when we were young, we were coerced by our livelihood. The 5 of us brothers once had a full 4 years, where we didn't have enough to eat every single day. Sometimes we only got a bun for 3 days, and the 5 of us ate it. He looked sad. Elder, do you think that we were born like this? Although we're not handsome, we still have some human features. But in those years, we had no choice but to eat rye-face mushrooms, so that we wouldn't starve to death. Although rye-face mushrooms are poisonous, they won't kill people. After eating a lot of them, a person's face will become more terrifying than a rye-face mushroom, and hair will become sparse until it's completely gone. Fortunately, we only ate for a month and a half before we were lucky enough to encounter a wild boar that fell from the cliff. But that month had already turned us into something that was neither human nor ghost. Later on, we had a fortuitous encounter and became capable. We no longer had to be coerced for food, but we were coerced by our strength. In order to increase our strength, we had to constantly train. After that, we were coerced for the sake of our reputation. We became ugly, but we cared more about our reputation. That's why we have to stand out and not be looked down upon. But in this layer of heaven, because of our ugly looks, none of the big aristocratic families or big forces are willing to take us in. So we became blood payers. If you become a blood payer, you can earn purple crystals. You can eat and cultivate. But we had to hand in the task. We weren't even emperor-level experts at that time. So how could we snatch it from others? Since he had come to the blood payers' hall to offer a reward, what kind of simple task would there be? Do you think we can handle it with our cultivation? So we can only look for an opportunity to take advantage of the situation when both sides are injured. Over time, we have been doing this all the way. When others look down on us, we look down on others. When big forces look down on us, we look down on them even more. We can't afford to offend them, but we can afford to hide from them. Along the way, we have been treated coldly and experienced the fickleness of human nature. Even my wife. Actually it's not. That time, I saved a dying old businessman and escorted him home. It was considered as an occasional act of kindness. Actually, it wasn't because the old man said that as long as I escorted him home, he would be willing to give me his precious purple crystals. I escorted him home and took good care of him along the way, fearing that he would die. In the end, the old man thought that I was reliable and said that he would betroth his daughter to me. After I sent him home, he didn't break his promise. At the very last moment, he invited all the guests to a banquet and announced the marriage between his daughter and me, setting us up. I was ugly and had no intention of having a family in this life. But that time, my heart was really moved. Nangong Shifeng had already sunk into his memories. There was a bitter smile at the corner of his mouth. That was the happiest and most peaceful day of my life. At that time, I even thought that as long as this family didn't despise me, I would give up wandering in the martial world and live here with my 4 younger brothers. I would continue to do business in the old man's family business. I wouldn't be involved in any disputes in the martial world and would just treat myself as an ordinary person. As long as my wife was willing to accept me, I would treat her well wholeheartedly for a lifetime. The old man passed away half a month after he returned home. I buried him as a human and took care of him in his old age. Only then did I know that my fiancé's heart was already with someone else. And the 2 of them were in love with each other and made a vow of love. When she told me about it, she said that if I didn't want to give up, she would give him half of the family property, so that he wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing. And she was willing to keep her promise and serve me for a lifetime, and be a good wife and mother for me. If I was willing to let her go, I was willing to give her all the family property, and she only wanted to be with her lover for a lifetime. Nangong Shifeng shook his head and laughed, but a few drops of tears fell down. Then what did you do? Chu Yang asked. Nangong Shifeng laughed hoarsely. Although he said that he was laughing, it sounded more like he was crying. I, Nangong Shifeng, am ugly. I admit it. Because I'm ugly, no woman is willing to look at me. I admit it. I'm despicable and shameless for my livelihood. I admit it. I can kneel in front of others and lick their shoes for my younger brothers to survive. I admit it. But I'm not so despicable as to force the woman that I like to do something that she doesn't like. Especially when it's a woman's lifelong happiness. That's why I left. I left the small town alone. I didn't want anything and left everything to them. Others said that my wife ran away with someone else. I admit it. Nangong Shifeng laughed. Why would a person like me look for a wife? Isn't that a joke? His voice was bleak and his smile was bleak. Chu Yang sighed. You left just like that? Just like that. Nangong Shifeng laughed. For so many years, even if I passed by that place, I would take a detour. Even if I had to walk a few thousand miles, I would still avoid that place. Not even once. Why? Why don't you go back and take a look? Go and see if she's doing well? Chu Yang frowned and his eyes flashed. No. Why should I go back? Nangong Shifeng shook his head and laughed. If she's not doing well, what can I do? Rejoice in her misfortune or snatch her away? If she's doing well, what can I do? Do I feel more upset and lost? Nangong Shifeng tried hard to frown and raise his eyebrows. He widened his eyes and controlled the tears that were about to flow out of his eyes. I'm also a very vulgar man. Although I'm uglier than other men, I have the temperament of a man. I've thought of seeing her not doing well, and seeing her regret. I hope that when I go back, she'll hug my leg and say that she's regretful. Then I'll kick her away and leave. I've also thought that if I see her living well, I'll go crazy with jealousy and maybe kill both of them. But I just think about it and don't dare to do it. Chu Yang sighed and patted his shoulder. He didn't say anything. At this moment, he suddenly decided to let Nangong Shifeng stay. This was a villain, a despicable villain. A despicable villain who was afraid of death and bullied the weak and the strong. But Chu Yang was moved by his last sentence. A very honest villain. Feeling the warmth of Chu Yang's hand, Nangong Shifeng could feel the warmth and understanding in Chu Yang's pat. He couldn't help but choke with sobs. Just now, you said that it's awkward to coerce, but I don't feel that it's coercion. Because every day is like this. But this time, it's the first time that we're working for a big shot. This is also our best chance. Nangong Shifeng raised his head and looked at Chu Yang frankly. I know that you're just making use of us now. But we really want to do a good job this time. We've been wandering for a generation, and really want to find someone to rely on. In this heavens, without any power to protect us, we're like a child without a mother. Life is too hard. He sniffled and said with a self-deprecating smile. If I can earn a living openly in this life, who would be willing to do such a despicable and shameless thing? If I can be happy and stable in this life, who would be willing to wander about? Chu Yang chuckled and said solemnly, as long as you can do this well, and be loyal to me in the future, I will give you a happy and stable life in an open and above-board manner. I'll even get rid of the poison of the rye-face mushroom in your brothers' bodies. Nangong Shifeng was overjoyed. Looking at Nangong Shifeng, and the other three leaving with gratitude, Chu Yang held the black jade box in his hands, and felt a little disappointed for a long time. Nangong Shifeng, Jinjian Hall. In everyone's mouth, he was unpardonably evil, but he also had such difficulties. Although Nangong Shifeng didn't say anything, Chu Yang could tell that this guy was afraid of death. He was probably doing this for the sake of his 4 younger brothers. Although the other 4 looked ferocious, he could tell at a glance that they weren't scheming. Without their big brother's care, they wouldn't be able to live for long in this heaven's world. Chu Yang could see the despair in Nangong Shifeng's eyes. A man's head was engraved with something that represented absolute shame. And the most important thing of a man was castrated. His reputation wasn't good, his looks were too ugly, and he fell in love only once in his life. but he still helped someone else. This was really a hopeless life. If it were others, they might not have the courage to continue living. But not only did Nangong Shifeng have to survive, he also had to fight with his 4 brothers. Although their methods were despicable, but, with their conditions, just like what they said. Who would use us for a job that's just and honorable? But if they could live happily and peacefully, who would be willing to wander from place to place? Since you want to live like a rebirth, I'll fulfill your wish this time, Chu Yang thought to himself. Chu Yang held a flower in his hand and rushed back. When he returned to the Purple Crystal's Huichun Hall, he found that the Huang clan's people all looked serious. Even Huang Xiaoyu, who was always unruly, was frowning. What happened? Chu Yang asked. They fought. Huang Xiaoyu sighed. Huh? The Xiao clan and your Huang clan fought? Chu Yang was shocked. So fast? How many people died? Is it important who died? Begging for monthly votes. We're about to be attacked. Brothers, hang in there. Hang in there. Brothers at the front line have run out of ammunition and food. Call for backup. Chapter 848. Huang Xiaoyu rolled his eyes. Boss, can you not gloat over my misfortune like this? I know I've offended you, but you don't have to be so obvious. No, I have a bad habit. I get excited when I hear about a fight. Chu Yang said seriously. My blood is boiling. Huang Xiaoyu twitched. I'm so worried that my hair has turned white. And you're still gloating over my misfortune. Quickly tell me, how's the fight going? Chu Yang was in high spirits as he crossed his legs. It turned out that recently, the people of the Xiao clan finally found 7th Master Xiao, who was almost dying, and saved him. At that time, 7th Master Xiao couldn't speak and was unconscious. The Xiao clan was finally furious and directly ordered an attack. The Huang clan had been waiting for a long time. Both sides confronted each other on both sides of the Black River. After a few words, a bloody battle broke out. Both sides had invested a lot of experts and countless killers were dispatched. The Huang family even issued a bounty for bloodpayers, offering a huge reward for their help. Currently, the whole southeast region was like a pot of water. Flames had already started to burn under the pot, and it was slowly heating up. As the temperature increased, it would become a pot of rotten porridge sooner or later. By then, both the Xiao clan and the Huang clan would suffer great losses. But there was one thing that Chu Yang couldn't figure out. Why is 7th Master Xiao unconscious? I remember that although his injury is serious, it's definitely not fatal. With 7th Master Xiao's perseverance, he could totally support himself and return to the clan. But he fainted halfway. Is there something fishy about this? In the space, the sword spirit said. Stupid. Yi Wubua's hidden weapons contain poison. It's already not bad that 7th Master Xiao didn't die. Chu Yang was suddenly enlightened. Then he said angrily, why didn't you say so earlier? If 7th Master Xiao died, what should we do? The sword spirit was also a little depressed, because he only thought of it just now. Otherwise he wouldn't have said so earlier. But there were mistakes in this matter. 7th Master Xiao was unconscious, and they couldn't drag Yi Wubua out. So they went against the Huang clan first. When they reached a certain level and couldn't stop, even if they knew that it was the Yi clan, they wouldn't be able to back down. If the Yi clan got involved, it would be even better. 3 days later, Chu Yang's dream came true. The Huang family and the Xiao family fought for 3 days. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. On the 3rd day, the Xiao family suddenly sent out their experts and attacked the Huang family's front line. Just as the Huang family was retreating, the Yi family suddenly appeared. More than 300 experts faced the Xiao family's experts head-on and crippled them on the spot, forcing them to retreat. The Huang clan's morale was greatly boosted by the sudden arrival of strong reinforcements. They pursued the Xiao clan's men and actually forced them back to the south of the Black River. They even swept through the Black Pine Forest like a gust of wind and burned the sky. The Yi clan's sudden intervention, and in such a domineering and irreconcilable manner, caught the Xiao clan off guard. After reorganizing their forces, both sides tacitly agreed to stop fighting and began to negotiate. Although the Yi clan was clear about this matter, the Xiao clan was still kept in the dark. How could they come to an agreement? Therefore, after a few discussions, the two sides fell out again. The experts sent by the Yi clan joined forces with the Huang clan and actually suppressed the Xiao clan for a while. At this time, the battle was in a stalemate. If the older generation experts or the secret forces of the Yi clan were not sent out, this battle would not end in a short time. These few days, Chu Yang hung a sign saying that the divine doctor has something to do and will not be seeing patients temporarily. It was simple and clear. He stayed in the law enforcement hall almost every day, waiting for the latest news of the battle. Sha Xinliang hung a map of the upper three heavens that was as big and as wide as the wall on the wall of the law enforcement hall. Qin Baoshan sighed in front of the map. It's really messed up. Look here, the Ling clan and the Li clan are fighting against each other. They don't play big games, but only launch sneak attacks and assassinations every day. Over here, the Xiao clan and the Li clan are fighting. On this side, the Xiao clan and the Huang clan are fighting. The Xiao clan is actually fighting against two sides. So is the Yi clan. The Yi clan is actually fighting against the Xiao clan at the same time. But in the general direction, the two clans are still joining forces to suppress the Li clan. What's going on? On this side, Zhuge Yunwu from the Zhuge clan is gradually reducing the power of the Li clan and going north step by step. This is the most regular one. But why did the Qin clan disappear after attacking once some time ago? And this side? Chu Yang sat at one side, drinking tea and watching Qin Baoshan's analysis. His face was solemn. Net 7 by 24 hours non-stop update pure TXT hand novel. In the tribulation space, the sword spirit sighed deeply. The tide of the heavenly layer has finally been raised by you, Chu Yang insipidly said. It's far from enough now. Only the middle-aged generation and the young generation are participating in the battle. The elders of each clan, and even the elders of their grandfather's generation, haven't come out yet. It's still far from a real riot. Such small skirmishes can only be considered as training for soldiers at best. The sword spirit said, with your current strength, being able to reach this step is already very good. Are you still not satisfied? What can you do with your current cultivation base of 4 swords, if you really want to do that? Chu Yang nodded. So I have to find the 5th fragment. The sword spirit said, can you leave now? Now that you have such a big business here, the Huang family, the Xiao family, the Yi family, Luer's illness, and the law enforcer's matter can all hold you back. You can't just leave as you wish. Chu Yang frowned and said, apart from Luer's illness, the rest are not a problem. Luer's illness needs you to treat once every 3 months. It can't be delayed, so she can only follow me. With her delicate physique, the long journey will be a big problem. The sword spirit also frowned. Then if you want to go to the medicine banquet, do you still need to go there in advance? Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't be able to catch up with Luer. That's the only way, Chu Yang said. But before I leave, I must improve the strength of the Chu clan. Otherwise, I won't be at ease. The sword spirit said, yes. It's necessary to improve the strength. But the Chu clan has that elder of yours, so there won't be any problems. If the clan is in a life and death situation, I don't believe that he'd rather die than improve his strength to save the clan. Chu Yang sighed deeply. He thought of Chu Xiaoxin's expression at that time. He was so affectionate. He really had no confidence in this matter. At this moment, Sha Xinliang hurriedly walked in from outside. It's here, it's here. Qin Baoshan said discontentedly. What's here? You're already so old. Why don't you have any self-control? You make a fuss whenever you encounter something. Little brother is still here. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? It's the purple cloud pills. Sha Xinliang swallowed his saliva and took out a purple crystal jade bottle from his chest with trembling hands. Qin Baoshan jumped up immediately. Purple cloud pills? Ha ha ha. Let me see. And he rushed up. Sha Xinliang snorted and said, you're so careless. Look at how weak you are. You're already so old, aren't you ashamed? Chu Yang laughed. The purple cloud pills were placed on the table. Has the law enforcement master taken any action? Qin Baoshan looked at the jade bottle of purple cloud pills and asked Sha Xinliang, is there any news? Tong Wuxin is missing, Sha Xinliang said. Tong Wuxin is missing. Qin Baoshan straightened up suddenly. What happened? After the law enforcement master went back, Tong Wuxin disappeared. Sha Xinliang said implicitly. Oh. Qin Baoshan heaved a sigh of relief. Missing. So be it. Chu Yang thought. It seems that Han Sharan has already taken action. He went back and controlled Tong Wuxin immediately. As he thought, he picked up the purple crystal jade bottle and unplugged the cork. A spicy smell came into his nose. Chu Yang coughed and said in surprise, "Why is there such a smell?" "This is the smell of purple cloud pills," Qin Baoshan and Sha Xinliang said at the same time. "We've heard about it before." There were a total of purple cloud pills in this small bottle. Obviously, Han Sharan's meaning was very clear. Chu Yang, Sha Xinliang and Qin Baoshan should have 2 pills. No more, no less. Everyone should share them equally. Every purple cloud pill was wrapped with a layer of wax. But even so, the spicy smell was still enough to make people cry. Chu Yang simply couldn't imagine how those experts who had taken the purple cloud pills to improve their martial powers were able to swallow them. He picked up a purple cloud pill and broke the wax layer. Instantly, the whole room was filled with chili powder and mustard powder. The 3 of them instantly cried. I was wondering why I've never heard of purple cloud pill. It turns out to be heaven ascending pill. The sword spirit twitched his mouth disdainfully in the tribulation space. Wasn't this medicine abandoned and banned? Why is it still available now? Heaven ascending pill? Chu Yang asked. At that time, the tribulation sword master wanted to improve the strength of his subordinates. So he gathered elixirs from the heavens and earth to refine elixirs. Thus this medicine was created. It's similar to heavy elixirs, but its effect is overbearing. It's not as gentle and harmless as heavy elixirs. Theoretically, this medicine can increase a person's martial powers by 1,000 years out of thin air. But after a few people took it, they realized that this medicine was actually highly toxic. Even a supreme being would instantly die from the rupture of all the meridians in his body after eating it. This is because the medicinal power of this medicine burst out together. Only by absorbing all the medicinal power at once and circulating it throughout the body and back to the dantian can one obtain this 1,000 years worth of martial powers. But even immortals don't have such wide meridians that can accommodate 1,000 years worth of martial powers at the same time. The sword spirit explained. Why? Chu Yang asked doubtfully. I don't understand what you mean. For example, a human's body is like a lake, and the power of this medicine is another bigger lake. If it's injected slowly and continuously, this lake may be expanded by the impact and accommodate another lake, merging into one big lake. But if such a big lake suddenly falls from the sky in an instant, I'm afraid that the lake on the ground will be gone in an instant and split into pieces. So this medicine is called heaven ascending pill. Once you take it, you'll ascend to the heavens. In other words, this heaven ascending pill is made from all the great tonics to create an absolutely fatal poison. The sword spirit laughed. I see. Chu Yang pondered and said, but it can be eaten now. The sword spirit said, let me take a look. Chu Yang put a pill into his bosom, and the sword spirit stole it into the tribulation space. Then without thinking, the sword spirit swallowed it. Chu Yang was shocked. You be careful. You'll stuff yourself to death. Only after he said this did he realize. This guy is just a soul. How can he stuff himself to death? Second update. I'll continue to write the third update. Begging for monthly votes. Brothers and sisters, the monthly votes list is in jeopardy. I need all of your support. Maybe the one in your hand is the vote that can change the situation. Everyone please support me. Chapter 849. Under Chu Yang's wide-opened eyes, the sword spirit's body bulged up at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant he looked very fat. Then he deflated heavily. Then, he bulged up again and deflated again. After 3 rounds of this he finally returned to normal. I see. The sword spirit heaved a long sigh of relief. The heaven ascending pill is missing, but the heavenly starwood powder and the inner core of the lust dragon are added. No wonder this heaven ascending pill can suddenly be consumed. The sword spirit clicked his tongue. This Dharma Supreme, who can think of this method, is really a genius. Even I didn't think of this method back then. Without the heaven ascending grass, the medicinal effect will be reduced by half. Moreover, by using the heavenly star wood and soaking it in the supreme martial artist's soul blood and merging it into the pill, the meridians in the body will have the same storage function as the heavenly star would. Lastly, by using the inner core of the lust dragon, it will widen the meridians in the body to the extreme, using the power of the world's #1 aphrodisiac poison. After that, after the medicinal effect enters the body, it can be temporarily stored in the meridians. Then, by fully exercising one's martial arts, the medicinal effect will be removed from the meridians bit by bit, entering the meridians and returning to the dantian. By the time the medicinal effect of the heavenly star wood is about to disappear, the total amount of cultivation in the body will have already exceeded the remaining medicinal effect. Coupled with the fact that the meridians have been widened by the aphrodisiac poison, there won't be much danger. The sword spirit clicked his tongue in praise. A genius, really a genius. To think of such a method, it's really incredible. Inner core of the lust dragon? Isn't that the world's #1 aphrodisiac? Chuyang licked his lips. We have it too. It's not that strange. It's not that strange. The sword spirit widened his eyes and sized Chuyang up. Finally he looked up and sighed. Do you know how many lust dragons there are in the heaven? Do you think that they're everywhere? Do you know how much you've gained? Do you know how precious lust dragons are? Chuyang was stunned. Lust flood dragons are not spiritual beasts, so it's hard to judge their rank. However, they are extremely rare. Lust flood dragons usually live in the same place as males and females. They prefer to be quiet and don't like to move. They can stay in the same place from birth until they die of old age. As long as they have food and drink, they won't move. Moreover, their biggest advantage is that they can eat anything. If there's meat, they'll eat meat. If there's no meat, they'll eat grass, trees, or even stones when they're very hungry. Furthermore, the lust dragon's movements are soundless, and it doesn't release any of its aura. Even if a middle-stage supreme being is outside the cave, as long as the lust dragon doesn't move, he won't be able to discover it. You think that it's easy for you to get those 2 lust dragons, but have you ever thought that this place belongs to Beyond the Heavens sect? How many years has your Beyond the Heavens sect been there? Who had ever seen 2 such huge lust dragons growing so close to each other? If Jing Meng Hun hadn't set the mountain on fire, and burned the stones until they turned red, and forced the lust dragons to come out by themselves, I'm afraid that you wouldn't have been able to see them even in 10 reincarnations. You wouldn't have been able to get so much flesh and inner core of a lust dragon, even if you had killed it, if you didn't have the tribulation space. Lust flood dragons have to self-detonate before they die, and their inner cores will explode together with their inner cores. Sword Spirit said angrily. He was speechless towards this guy who was pretending to be innocent after getting a bargain. He was holding a precious treasure in his hand, and he was treating it like grass? How could this be true in this world? Chuyang sweated. So that's how it is. Fortunately, I didn't waste it. Do you think that you can waste this thing as you wish? Sword Spirit said angrily. Do you want to eat more meat or drink more blood? No matter which one it is. Your body will be burned to death by the lust poison if you overdo it. Yet you're still rejoicing? You wouldn't have gotten a single strand of hair if the Sword Spirit hadn't spent so much effort to preserve the corpse of the lust dragon for you. Chuyang was sweating profusely from being scolded, and he finally flew into a rage out of humiliation. He said angrily, That's because you wanted me to ask you to preserve it. You just did a little thing, and now you're talking about it endlessly. Why don't you just destroy it? Sword Spirit was stunned. Sword Master Chu's words were very unreasonable, and he was almost making a scene, but Sword Spirit really didn't dare to do anything. Besides, the tribulation space was Sword Master Chu's space. Sword Spirit could preserve anything, but if he wanted to destroy it, Sword Master Chu didn't agree. Could he destroy it? That was absolutely impossible. So Sword Spirit was stunned. What was the use of meeting such an unreasonable Sword Master? Even if Sword Spirit had great abilities and unparalleled eloquence. Chuyang smiled. This is called one strong person can defeat 10 skilled people. Sword Spirit curled his lips and said, One hooligan can deal with 10 righteous sovereigns. That's how it is. Sword Master Chu snorted and said, I'm a hooligan, what can you do about it? Sword Spirit didn't say anything. Now that he had the upper hand, Chu Jianzhu was filled with pride as he asked, Can we make such a pill? Sword Spirit said listlessly, We have all the other medicines, and even if there's a shortage, we can use Jade Snow Spirit Ginseng, and a little bit of mysterious ice jade ointment to make up for it. Now, as long as we have a little bit of powder from Heavenly Starwood, we can produce it immediately. And from my hands, it'll definitely be much stronger than this stuff. Although the effect will still be reduced from 1,000 years to only 500 years, there'll definitely be no side effects. At most, we'll just have to worry about the spiritual realm and divine soul realm, but we'll definitely not die from it. Chu Yang was overjoyed. This is really great. Actually, we have Heavenly Starwood too. He thought of the tea box made of Heavenly Starwood that Elder Chu Xiaoxin had and couldn't help but smile. Of course, Elder Chu Xiaoxin wouldn't be willing to smash all of it. But if he only scraped off a little bit of powder and didn't harm the foundation, Elder Chu Xiaoxin shouldn't be so stingy? Sword Spirit snorted and said, You go and try? That Elder Chu Xiaoxin is very stingy. Scraping off a little bit of powder? He can even scrape off a layer of your skin. Chu Yang smiled mischievously. This is like reading a songbook while riding a donkey. Let's wait and see. I have many ways to make that Elder Chu Xiaoxin voluntarily give me Heavenly Starwood powder. Sword Spirit snorted. Well, for these few pills, Old Sha and Old Qin should take 2 pills each. There shouldn't be any problem? Chu Yang thought of this matter and asked Sword Spirit. Qin Baoshan is a little stronger. He's an 8th stage martial monarch. It shouldn't be a problem for him to increase his power by 500 years to the peak of the martial monarch level. It shouldn't be a problem for him to break through to the 1st stage of the martial monarch level with the 2nd pill. But you'll need to use silver needles to help him unblock his meridians and expand them. Sword Spirit looked at Qin Baoshan and Sha Xinliang with glowing eyes in the tribulation space. Both of them suddenly felt a chill down their spines. It seemed that a powerful enemy was staring at them, but when they looked around, they didn't find anything. Only Chu Yang lowered his head and seemed to be thinking about how to take the purple cloud pills. Both of them didn't dare to disturb him. Both of them felt strange. What's going on? As for Sha Xinliang, he's only 1 stage lower than Qin Baoshan. It'll be more difficult for him to take the pills, and he'll have to suffer more. But even though he'll be better off dead, he'll still be able to get through it, Sword Spirit continued. Then it's okay. Let the 2 of them take the pills first. After I've solved the problem for them, we'll immediately return to the Chu clan and ask for the Heavenly Starwood from our ancestors. Chu Yang said excitedly. Sha Xinliang and Qin Baoshan looked at Chu Yang in deep contemplation anxiously. Both of them knew that as long as Chu Yang said it was okay, there would definitely be no problem for the 2 of them to take the pills. If Chu Yang said it wasn't okay, the 2 of them would definitely not take the pills. Other people who took the pills would have at least 1 high-level martial saint guarding them and helping them to stabilize their meridians. But now there was only a teenager in front of them. Thinking of this, both of them felt like crying. It's okay. Chu Yang finally raised his head and said. The 2 of them were excited. But there'll be a pain worse than death. Chu Yang continued. Both of their faces fell. Who'll go first? Chu Yang asked. Chu Yang couldn't wait to go home and refine his own purple cloud pill. I'll go first. I'll go first. Sha Xinliang and Qin Baoshan stepped forward at the same time. Both of them looked at each other with determined eyes. Although the pills they'd never taken before could improve their cultivation, it contained absolute danger. Whoever took the pills first would be in greater danger, and whoever took the pills later would be mentally prepared and experienced. Both of them were rushing to take the pills first, because they wanted to take the risks first and create opportunities for the other party. If there was danger, they would be willing to die for their master. Chu Yang's heart warmed up. Both of them were still arguing when Qin Baoshan stepped forward and said, Now that I'm 1 stage higher than you, why are you fighting with me? Without any explanation, Qin Baoshan grabbed the jade bottle and poured out a pill. He broke the wax coating with his 2 fingers and swallowed the pill. Then, he sat cross-legged on the ground. Sha Xinliang's words were stuck in his throat. He was afraid that his words would disturb his old buddy's mood. His face turned red, and his eyes were full of anxiety. You bastard! Even if you take the pills first, you should be prepared. You swallowed the pills in one gulp. You're looking for death. Sha Xinliang roared angrily in his heart. But if he asked himself honestly, if Qin Baoshan didn't do this just now, the one who would do this would definitely be him. He had even planned it out. They'd been brothers for hundreds of years. Who would want to die in front of his brother? But he didn't want to see his brother die in front of him. That was an unbearable sorrow. Get out of the way! Chu Yang shouted. 30 shiny silver needles appeared in his hands at the same time. The silver needles shone with dazzling light, causing pain to the eyes. At the moment when Qin Baoshan's face revealed a trace of pain, Chu Yang slid forward and inserted a silver needle into the Baihui acupoint on Qin Baoshan's head without hesitation. Only the needle handle was left outside. Sha Xinliang shuddered violently and stared blankly at Qin Baoshan. This was an absolutely fatal spot. Yet such long silver needles were inserted into it. Then Chu Yang didn't stop. He inserted a needle into Qin Baoshan's chest, another 3 needles into his dantian, and another 3 needles into the back of his head. Then Chu Yang kicked Qin Baoshan. Qin Baoshan's body spun like a top, and the silver needles in Chu Yang's hands fell on his back like raindrops. To be continued. Chapter 850. With a bang, a strong wave of air suddenly erupted. Qin Baoshan's clothes were instantly torn into pieces. Qin Baoshan's face was red, and his meridians were bulging. At this moment, it was as if a human meridian map had appeared on Qin Baoshan's body. Chu Yang panted, and his forehead was sweating profusely. He looked at Qin Baoshan without blinking, paying attention to every change. Finally, Qin Baoshan's muscles and bones were bulging out like a steamed bun. He was visibly getting fatter. Chu Yang's eyes turned into a pair of copper bells. At this moment, only when Qin Baoshan's body was swollen to the limit could there be an immediate effect, and all the turbulence would return to the dantian instantly. If it was done earlier, the medicinal effect would not be fully absorbed and would be wasted. Moreover, it would be harmful to the human body if it was stored in the body. It was very likely that the blood vessels would be broken, and the person would become a useless person. If it was done later, the person would explode into blood powder. Sha Xinliang's bald head was sweating profusely. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the heavens and the earth, praying silently. Qin Baoshan, who was enduring extreme pain, had not collapsed, but Sha Xinliang was so nervous that he almost collapsed. Qin Baoshan's body continued to swell. Slowly, his muscles were almost transparent, and cracks appeared on the surface of his skin. He was about to explode. Chu Yang's shout was like a clap of thunder. With a kick, Qin Baoshan's body was kicked upside down. Sha Xinliang clearly saw that Qin Baoshan's flesh and blood were bulging out crazily at this moment. He couldn't help but yell heartbreakingly, "No!" At this moment, Chu Yang's hands flashed, and a silver light flashed. The last 3 silver needles were shot out at the same time. 2 of them were inserted into the bottom of Qin Baoshan's feet. The other one was inserted into his dantian, waist, and head. Silver needles were inserted into the 7 fatal acupoints of his body at the same time. Chu Yang's hands trembled like butterflies. 30 silver needles were inserted into Qin Baoshan's body, and the ends of the needles trembled violently at the same time. Some were spiraling, some were swaying, and some were rising and falling slowly. None of the needles were the same. Qin Baoshan's hair suddenly stood up, and his body straightened and swelled up. He remained motionless in this situation. After a long time, the buzzing sound of the silver needles became smaller and smaller. Chu Yang shouted loudly and rushed forward like lightning. Shwa shwa shwa. His figure flashed and 30 silver needles were taken out from Qin Baoshan's body at the same time. Chi chi chi. Qin Baoshan immediately became a black hedgehog. Pitch black blood, or some unknown impurities, crazily spurted out from the 30 acupuncture points. It smelled extremely fishy, drawing a thin black line in the air. With a chi-chi sound, it actually spurted out several feet before hitting the wall. It actually made small black holes on the wall. Qin Baoshan's body began to shrink slowly after the black objects were shot out. Chu Yang looked on nervously. He didn't know when a bowl of water had appeared beside his hand. Even Sha Xinliang didn't notice it. Vitality spring water. Now the 30 silver needles were soaked in the vitality spring water. There were faint traces of black blood on the silver needle. Then, under the vitality of the vitality spring water, it turned into a faint mist, emitting a fishy smell, and dispersed in the air. Qin Baoshan's body returned to its original state. Sha Xinliang looked on with tears in his eyes. He couldn't help but shout out in surprise. But Chu Yang covered his mouth with a piece of cloth, and he could only whimper. Don't shout. The medicinal effect isn't over yet. As Chu Yang spoke, Qin Baoshan's body swelled up again. Chu Yang grabbed the silver needles in his hand again. This happened 3 times in a row. Qin Baoshan finally returned to normal. A strange sound like popping beans could be heard from his bones. And an aura of a breakthrough was suddenly emitted. Monarch level. As the aura of a breakthrough surged, it slowly pushed to the peak step by step, and then stopped. Indeed, as the sword spirit said, a purple cloud pill could only help Qin Baoshan advance from the beginner of the 8th stage monarch level to the peak of the 8th stage monarch level. Chu Yang couldn't help but click his tongue. This was a cultivation of 500 years. Only 1 level? Was it so difficult to break through the cultivation of the monarch level? 2 streams of muddy mucus spurted out from Qin Baoshan's nostrils like 2 long dragons. With a whoosh, the mucus actually broke through the door of the hall and flew out with 2 holes as big as his nostrils. 2 sounds of ouch and plop could be heard from far away, and a guy's exasperated voice could be heard. What the hell? There's actually someone who uses mucus as a hidden weapon. Ouch. It hurts. Pooh. It's so smelly. Ouch ouch ouch. An unlucky guy was smashed down by the 2 buckets of mucus in the room. Chu Yang and Sha Xinliang looked at each other. Qin Baoshan stood up slowly, stretched his limbs, closed his eyes and checked his cultivation. He said, Thank you, little brother. I've actually broken through to the monarch level. I'm only half a step away from the saint level. Sha Xinliang was overjoyed. Brother Qin, how do you feel? Qin Baoshan's face revealed a look of lingering fear, and he said slowly, I feel that I've died 3 times. Sha Xinliang sucked in a cold breath. He knew that Qin Baoshan wasn't exaggerating when he said that he had died 3 times. He really felt that he had died 3 times. What kind of powerful medicinal effect was this? It's okay. Come, open your mouth. You'll get used to it after 3 more times. Chu Yang picked up a purple cloud pill, broke the wax coat without saying anything, and flicked it with his finger. Qin Baoshan was about to speak when the pill went into his mouth. He said exasperatedly, What the hell? Can't you just let me rest for a while? He wanted to say, Can't you just let me rest for a while? But before he finished his words, the familiar medicinal effect had already begun to brew. His face changed, and he hurriedly sat down cross-legged. There was a strong depression on his face. Chu Yang began to expand his acupoints with his silver needles again. His eyes were dignified, and he said, He can't rest at this time. Once he understands, he'll be afraid. By then, it'll be twice the effort for half the result. Before he has time to be afraid, let's quickly destroy him again. Let him be afraid together with him later. Sha Xinliang's face was pale, and he shuddered. He wiped off his cold sweat and said, Little brother, you're much more ruthless than Law Enforcement Master Han. Chu Yang snorted. Qin Baoshan's side had already reacted. He immediately concentrated and didn't have time to talk anymore. When Chu Yang finished protecting Sha Xinliang with his silver needles twice, Chu Yang was almost exhausted. Han Shaoran, oh Han Shaoran, you've really found a good job for me. Chu Yang muttered. Qin Baoshan and Sha Xinliang had died 3 times, and Chu Yang was also half dead from exhaustion. Sha Xinliang's cultivation was 1 level lower than Qin Baoshan's, so he suffered more. Chu Yang was also more tired. When Chu Yang finally finished absorbing half of the purple cloud pills, Sha Xinliang was already lying on the ground, panting like a corpse. He even said, I can still breathe. I'm so damn lucky. Chu Yang lay beside him tiredly and groaned. You're lucky. Not only have your cultivation improved, but you've also advanced to the martial saint level. But I didn't get any benefits. I'm so tired that I'm almost vomiting blood. And I still have to listen to you two talking here. Author's note. Talking about sheep fainting means showing off one's cleverness after getting some benefits. It's the local dialect of Shandong Laiwu. Epilogue. Goats pushing the mill, sheep fainting. Their cultivation had indeed advanced to the martial saint level. Qin Baoshan had reached the first stage of the martial saint level. Sha Xinliang had also reached the beginner stage of the first stage of the martial saint level. But there was a big gap between the first stage and the beginner stage. But the two were already very satisfied. They had never thought that they would have a chance to break through to the martial saint level in their lives. The two laughed together and said, "Little brother, let's not talk about formalities between us. In short, as long as you say the word, these two brothers will go through the water, the fire, and the fire. We're not heroes even if we frown." Chu Yang laughed heartily. Then he frowned and reminded them, "Elder brothers, you have to be careful. Although you relied on the violent power of the purple cloud pill to forcefully break through the cultivation barrier and reach the saint level, your mental state, spiritual state, and soul cultivation are still stuck at the current level. So strictly speaking, you are not saint level yet. If you fight with martial saints of the same level, you'll definitely lose." He said solemnly, "The cultivation of one's mental state can only be achieved through comprehension or through battle. Both of you have to hurry up. Since the law enforcement master has already laid his hands on Tong Wuxin, the battle will be extended to you at any time. So, there's not much time left for you to improve." The two of them nodded solemnly. Thinking of the upcoming battles, everyone was in a heavy mood. Although their cultivation had improved greatly, they were about to face one of the dominant clans, the Shi clan, which was full of experts. It was really hard to imagine how much a first-stage martial saint could do in a battle. Actually, both of you are about the same level. As long as you fight a few battles with all your strength, both of you will be half dead. It'll be very fast for you to improve. Chu Yang left these words and bade farewell to the two. He grabbed the last purple cloud pill and left the law enforcement hall, ready to rush back to the Chu clan. On the way, he passed by the purple crystals Huichun Hall, but was stopped by Wuji from the Huang clan. He said excitedly, "The 3 medicines that my master needs have arrived." Chu Yang stopped his footsteps. "Absolute Vine, Lifeless Death Water and Life Pangolin have arrived? Your Huang family is really fast." This was really good news coming one after another. Once the gourd was pressed down, the ladle floated up. "Yes, Divine Dr. Chu. When will you start treating my master?" Wuji asked. "Yes, right away. I'll go back to the Chu clan to take the things and make preparations. Suppress the 3 medicines with purple crystals for a night, and we can start treating him tomorrow." Chu Yang was not in the mood to treat Huang Gong's erectile dysfunction. He casually made up a reason and delayed it for a day. "That's great." Wuji didn't know that this was a necessary procedure. His face lit up and he nodded repeatedly. "I'll make preparations immediately." Before he finished his words, Chu Yang had already disappeared. He only left a sentence. "Then I'll go back to make preparations immediately too." Wuji was touched. Looking at Chu Yang's back, he thought, "What a divine doctor. He's so considerate to the patients. He's worthy of admiration." Who would have thought that although this fellow kept saying that he was doing this, and that for her husband, what he was doing now had nothing to do with treating her husband's illness. It was completely unrelated. Chapter 851. Chu Yang saw the thatched cottage again. Chu Yang's heart calmed down inexplicably. Then, he remembered something and said to the sword spirit, "It's really strange. Elder Master is at the peak of the 5th stage of martial saint, while Wuji is at the middle stage of martial saint. But the feeling I get from Elder Master and Wuji are completely different." The sword spirit smiled. "Oh, Wuji gives me the feeling that he's deep and unparalleled. He's like a towering mountain that's unmovable. But Elder Master gives me the feeling that he's ethereal and real. I can't grasp him at all." Chu Yang pondered for a while and said, "If we were to compare the two of them, I feel that Wuji is far inferior to Elder Master. What's going on?" The sword spirit laughed somewhat mockingly. "How can Wuji be compared to Chu Xiaoxin? If you use the two of them as an example, You are gravely mistaken. Chu Yang asked, why? Firstly, in terms of pure cultivation, Bai Wuji is as steep as a mountain, while Chu Xiaoxin is as deep as the sea. Mountain and sea, one is still and the other is moving. One is high and the other is low. And their starting points are also different. The mountain has an end while the sea has no end. They can't be compared at all. Secondly, in terms of cultivation, Bai Wuji is at the middle stage of martial saint, but Chu Xiaoxin is at the 5th stage of martial saint, but he's suppressing it himself. Chu Xiaoxin's spiritual cultivation has already surpassed that of a supreme martial artist. Now he's at least a 2nd stage supreme martial artist. That's why I said, even if you leave, as long as he's willing to break through, nothing will go wrong. Other than the big clans, I'm afraid only your Chu clan has supreme martial artists. Thirdly, although Bai Wuji is at the middle stage of martial saint, he's been under someone for a long time. Chu Xiaoxin, on the other hand, has absolute power in the Chu clan. How can their attitudes be compared? You must know that attitudes determine attitudes, and attitudes determine aura. The sword spirit taught Chu Yang sincerely. Chu Yang humbly listened to his teachings. He knew that from this moment onwards, he'd really started to receive the education of what a real expert is. And there's another point. Bai Wuji cultivates the path of ruthlessness, while Chu Xiaoxin cultivates the path of emotions. There's a huge difference between the two. Therefore, in the entire southeast region, apart from the Xiao clan, the real #1 expert is Chu Xiaoxin. Even though the Huang clan is powerful now, I'm afraid that there might not be any real experts who are better than Chu Xiaoxin. The sword spirit said in a heavy tone. Wait until you have the opportunity to meet a supreme level expert. Then, you'll understand the true form of a supreme level expert. It's useless to tell you now. I see. Chu Yang finally understood. Now he was standing in front of the mottled door. After calming himself down, he gently knocked on the door. A sigh came from inside. Why are you here again? Chu Yang chuckled and said, I'm here to pay my respects to elder ancestor. Chu Xiaoxin's voice sounded a little dissatisfied. You must be up to no good by coming to me. Speak, have you taken a fancy to my starwood? Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. This old ancestor's foresight was indeed godly. He actually guessed that Chu Yang was here for the starwood. On second thought, he couldn't help but be speechless. It seemed that the old ancestor didn't have anything good other than this. He chuckled and said, Elder ancestor, can you let me in first? Chu Xiaoxin sighed. As expected. Then there was no sound. After a long time, the door creaked open by itself. That courtyard full of weeds appeared in front of Chu Yang again. Chu Yang stepped in carefully, remembering what he said last time. Step on the green grass, don't step on my withered grass. Step by step, he approached the hut. The sword spirit kept muttering in the tribulation space. This old guy is not easy to talk to. He's extremely stingy. Last time, he didn't even give you some tea. This time, you actually want the starwood. It's not surprising that he'll break your legs. However, the negotiation process left the sword spirit flabbergasted. The conversation was extremely short and clean. What do you want that for? It's useful for the clan to improve its strength. Alas, I only need a little bit of powder. I'll scrape it from the outermost layer. It won't hurt the inside. Alas, I really only need a little bit. Did I say that I don't want you to scrape it? The conversation ended here. Then, Chu Yang took out a small knife and slowly scraped the powder of the starwood. Chu Xiaoxin watched from the side, his face full of pain. But as he watched, Chu Xiaoxin was surprised. What kind of knife is this? It can actually scrape the starwood. Chu Yang chuckled. If I didn't have this knife, I wouldn't dare to have any ideas about the starwood. If the old ancestor were to scrape it himself, I probably wouldn't even have a chance. Chu Xiaoxin laughed and scolded. Little brat, you know me well. Chu Yang laughed and scraped the powder even faster. The sword spirit was taken aback. He's not willing to scrape a few cups of tea, but he's willing to let you scrape the priceless starwood as you wish. Chu Yang sighed. Sword spirit, I don't know how you spent your time with the previous tribulation sword masters, or how their heartlessness affected you. So, you've only been a sword spirit for 10,000 years, and not a human spirit. Humans have feelings and concerns. The old ancestor didn't give me tea because it was made by his deceased wife. He wanted to use that tea to support himself, and not forget his wife and brothers. This is love. He's allowing me to scrape the starwood now because he's also worried about his descendants. This is also love. Chu Yang said, Sword Spirit, you understand all the techniques, you know all the cultivation realms, and you also understand the difference between the martial way and the heavenly way. In my eyes, you're omnipotent, but the only thing you lack is love, the love of humans. The Sword Spirit became silent and murmured, the love of humans. Everything in the world has a spirit, but humans are the masters of everything. Whether it's the 3 stars divine ancestors, or the dragon clan or the demon clan, their final path is to transform into humans, and then they can strive for the peak in their human form. Because only through their human form can they understand the 7 realms of cultivation, and only then can they perfect their spiritual cultivation, which then becomes spiritual cultivation, and finally become a complete godly soul. This shows the importance of humans. Chu Yang said deeply, Sword Spirit, you should also have your own cultivation path. If you can't get out of the realm of the sword, I'm afraid you'll never reach the peak. The Sword Spirit became completely silent this time. The previous Tribulation Sword Masters had all tried their best to tap into the power of the Sword Spirit to help them achieve great things. But which one of them had ever cared about the Sword Spirit? Chu Yang's words were said from the bottom of his heart, but to the Sword Spirit, it was no different from being enlightened. It made the Sword Spirit faintly touched. Chu Yang finally finished scraping the starwood powder. He knew very well that he only scraped a little bit. When he rolled it up and wrapped it in a fluffy paper bag, it was only the size of a walnut. Enough? Chu Xiaoxin was a little surprised. Enough. Chu Yang straightened up. Why so little? Chu Xiaoxin frowned and looked at Chu Yang inquisitively. There are many things in the world that are worth cherishing. The starwood isn't the most precious thing. The most precious thing is always the reverence and respect in people's hearts. Chu Yang said a little seriously, the starwood is just a container. The tea inside is also just a token of your concern. But what we should cherish the most is your concern for me. Chu Xiaoxin's body shook. He stared at Chu Yang and didn't speak for a long time. After a while, he revealed a gratified look and said, I'm very relieved that the Chu clan has a descendant like you. Chu Yang bowed. Elder, you're flattering me. Chu Xiaoxin seemed to be in a very good mood. He waved his hand and said, Come, drink tea with me. The tea was already soaked. It was still the same 5 teacups. The fragrance of the tea filled the air. Chu Xiaoxin sat upright and looked down at the rising steam. He said, That day, when you were dealing with Chu Failong, I was right outside the window of your room. I saw with my own eyes that you were sowing discord and making the Yi clan rebel. You killed Chu Failong, and even framed 7th Master Xiao. Chu Yang was shocked. Ah. Chu Xiaoxin was also there that day. Chu Yang finally understood the problem of Chu Xiaoxin's strength that the Sword Spirit mentioned. Han Shaoran was also there that day. But Han Shaoran obviously didn't discover Chu Xiaoxin's presence. You don't have to worry. I won't blame you. Chu Xiaoxin chuckled. I heard the conversation between Chu Failong and his 2 sons. So I went there. Since you can handle it yourself, of course, I won't interfere. I'm very happy that you've handled this matter, Chu Xiaoxin said. Chu Yang nodded and said, So you're saying that all of Chu Failong's schemes have been seen through by you? Chu Xiaoxin nodded and sighed. Yes. But you didn't stop him. Chu Yang was a little dissatisfied. Of course I can stop him. But if I stop him, how long can I stop him? After all, I'm old. The clan still needs to be passed down. If I interfere too much, the Chu clan will be destroyed once I die. Chu Xiaoxin sighed and said, If you can't solve the crisis yourselves, then the future clan master of this clan will be Chu Failong. Chu Xiaoxin said, In your opinion, Chu Failong is unpardonable. But do you know that Chu Failong only did something that's common among the big clans? That's all. If a clan wants to develop, strengthen, and rise, the person it needs is never a hero like your father. A hero like your father is too straightforward. Such a person is respectable. But if he's in charge, he could easily lead the entire clan to a dead end. Because there are too many schemes that a hero can't handle. I let your grandfather be the clan master because he's stupid. He's stupid and can't see some things. He's in awe, so he can protect himself. What a clan needs to develop and rise is a hero like Chu Feilong. Only a ruthless and unscrupulous person can be a successful leader. Chu Xiaoxin said. Chu Feilong, it's good that you died. But it's also a pity that you died. He turned to look at Chu Yang. But you're very strange. You're neither a hero nor a hero. You're in between the two. You're more heroic than your father, more cunning than your uncle, and more meticulous than your daughter. I've never seen a person like you in my life. You're really a demon talent. Today's first update. We're only a few votes away from the first place. Everyone, let's work harder and rush up. Today my comrade is coming over from Jinan. I'm going to pick him up and have dinner together. So, the update at night will be a little late. But no matter how late it is, there will definitely be an update today. And it will be released. Chapter 852. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. If you know how a demon like me came to be and what I've experienced, you won't be surprised anymore. Chu Xiaoxin smiled. If you're born naturally, I won't feel anything. But how can a genius achieve great things without going through hardships? The education that I've received since childhood is much better than yours. Whether it's demeanor or strategy, they're all better than you. But you only have to remember one thing. A hero's true colors can only be seen at the critical moment of life and death. Chu Xiaoxin smiled and said, So, how can one see a person's real courage and confidence without being at the critical moment of life and death? And if you want to compete with the big clans, victory or defeat will be at the critical moment of life and death. Chu Yang nodded silently. He could completely understand what Chu Xiaoxin meant by victory or defeat is at the critical moment of life and death. It wasn't that time was short, but where was the key to victory or defeat? Or where was the key to defeating the enemy? Chu Yang proposed to leave, and Chu Xiaoxin didn't ask him to stay. But when Chu Yang was about to leave the room, he said quietly, Even if you have experience, you may not have such comprehension. Even if you have such comprehension, you may not have such ability. Chu Yang paused and smiled bitterly. Because I regard myself as a man, I should be able to go up and down. Chu Xiaoxin let out a long sigh. After some time, I'll go out to train for a period of time, Chu Yang said quietly. So if anything happens, I won't be able to come back in time. Besides, my father and fourth uncle have already set off, and third uncle hasn't returned yet. I'll use the heavenly star wood to make a medicine that can improve their skills. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble you to protect them and help them improve their skills. Chu Xiaoxin nodded slowly. Chu Yang breathed a sigh of relief. He put down his biggest worry and walked out. It was much safer for Chu Xiaoxin to protect them than for him to protect them with his medical skills. Because the supreme martial artist's spiritual power would constantly monitor the changes in the body of the person who took the medicine and make adjustments at any time. But he couldn't do it himself. With the heavenly star wood in hand, the sword spirit got busy. When Chu Yang returned to the Purple Crystal's Huichun Hall, the Huang clan was already waiting anxiously. They were all overjoyed to see Chu Yang. Where's your medicine? Let me have a look, Divine Dr. Chu said happily. Here. Bai Wuji took off a piece of white cotton cloth, revealing a purple light underneath. Purple crystals were used as the ground, and purple crystals were used as the blanket. Here was the absolute vine, the lifeless water of death, and the life pangolin. Not bad. Chu Yang carefully examined the 3 medicinal herbs and said, Have you received the final consultation fee? If they arrive, we'll start the treatment immediately. As soon as he said this, the Huang family and the others looked at each other in dismay. During this period of time, the Huang clan had been embroiled in wars. How would they have the time to pay Divine Dr. Chu? Now that Chu Yang had brought up this issue, it was a real checkmate. Huang Xiaoyou's face instantly turned pale. Not yet, Huang Xiaoyou said weakly. His body was trembling a little. In these few days, he felt that his body was recovering bit by bit, and his masculinity was returning bit by bit. He was extremely excited. But when he heard these words, He felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. If you don't pay, who's going to treat you? Chu Yang sighed and said, forget it, Duke Huang has been staying here for this period of time. I quite like it. As soon as he said this, Chu Luo immediately covered her mouth. Other than playing tricks on him, I really can't tell that you like him. It's really difficult to treat the art of severing posterity. First, I'll use bitterness to clear the stomach, tidy up the meridians and calm the spirit. Then, I'll use stench to trigger a reaction from the insidious martial arts. After that, I'll use acid to expel the insidious martial arts to the reachable parts. These 3 steps are definitely worse than death. Chu Yang's face was solemn, and he said, how can ordinary people bear it? But Duke Huang is able to bear it one by one. This shows that Duke Huang has great potential. I'm deeply impressed. He pondered for a while and said, Duke Huang has such perseverance. You'll definitely achieve great things in the future. Fine. I'll make an exception this time. I'll treat Duke Huang without receiving any consultation fee. If your clan sends the consultation fee to me in the future, I'll accept it. If, haha, I'll also form a good relationship with Duke Huang, who has a promising future. As soon as he said this, Bai Wuji's face lit up with joy. Huang Xiaoyou was so grateful that his tears almost flowed out. After being here for so long, when had he seen Divine Dr. Chu making an exception? That was absolutely impossible. But, not only did Chu Yang take a fancy to him, but he also felt that he had great potential, and even made an exception for him. Duke Huang suddenly had a feeling of a gentleman dies for his bosom friend. Boss! Boss! Duke Huang Xiaoyou stepped forward and held Chu Yang's hands tightly. You're my benefactor. I really don't know what to say. As he spoke, Duke Huang's voice choked, and his face was full of gratitude. Chu Yang patted his shoulder generously and said solemnly, brother, I understand your feelings. Really? Huang Xiaoyou cried loudly. Boss, I've suffered so much all these years. Boss, I can't even spend money in the brothel. It's so hard. You can spend money tomorrow. Chu Yang looked down helplessly. Boo-hoo, that's great. I'll go to the brothel tomorrow. Huang Xiaoyou cried bitterly. Suddenly, he felt cold all over, and his hair stood on end. As he turned his head, he saw his 2 wives staring at him like sharp swords. He hurriedly changed his words. I'll go to the brothel tomorrow, and smash the brothel. How can there be such a dirty place? Boo-hoo! Chu Yang was full of cold sweat. When the 2 husbands looked at him just now, even he felt cold all over. He couldn't help but sigh. A woman's jealousy is really the #1 skill in the world. I'll go and refine medicine now. Chu Yang pushed Duke Huang aside and escaped in a flash. Huang Xiaoyou took 2 steps back and stood between the 2 husbands. His face was pale, and he forced a smile. Husbands, please calm down. Due to his guilt and inferiority complex, Duke Huang had no confidence in front of his wives. Husbands, don't worry. I'll never let other women take advantage of me. I'll leave everything to you. Get lost. Do we care? The 2 husbands attacked at the same time, and then left in shame and anger. Ah! Duke Huang screamed, and a pair of panda eyes appeared on his face. Divine Dr. Chu's refining speed was amazing. In just a short time, before the sky turned dark, he had finished refining the medicine. His body was weak, and he carried a purple jade bottle out. Huang Xiaoyou. I'm here. Huang Xiaoyou rushed forward. Boss, I'm here. Quick. Chu Yang's hand trembled as he handed over the jade bottle. Quick. Duke Huang Xiaoyou knew that this was the moment when the medicine was refined. How would he dare to neglect it? He quickly took over the jade bottle, opened the bottle cap and stretched his neck. Quick. Let Senior Bai unblock your meridians first. Then drink it quickly. Divine Dr. Chu finished his words at this moment. Duke Huang was so shocked that he didn't have time to react. He stretched his neck like a rooster, and with a gulp, the medicine in the jade bottle had already entered his stomach. Only then did he become dazed. I still need to unblock my meridians first. Divine Dr. Chu finally breathed a sigh of relief and sighed deeply. Why are you so rash? Huang Xiaoyou's whole body went soft at once, and he cried miserably, Boss, will this be harmful? The two saint-level experts were also tongue-tied and dumbfounded. It's not harmful. It's just, Chu Yang sighed. The effect of the medicine is a bit too strong. Ah. Huang Xiaoyou was at a loss. Then he felt his whole body heating up. His pale face slowly turned red. Then, the veins on his forehead suddenly bulged, and he roared towards the sky. A whoa! Everyone was surprised. Then with a whoosh, a tall tent bulged out from Huang Gong's crotch at a speed that was as fast as lightning. Bai Wuji and Ziting exclaimed, and their mouths opened widely. He's up. Then Du Huang moaned. I'm so uncomfortable. What's going on? It's so uncomfortable. Chu Yang sighed. What do you want to do? I want. Huang Xiaoyou finally lost his consciousness. The desire that he didn't dare to speak out for a long time finally erupted from his mouth. I want to go to a brothel. I want to find 100 girls. The medicinal effect of the lust dragon's inner core was definitely the #1 aphrodisiac in the world. Du Huang's fertility-severing hand had already been eliminated by the lust dragon's blood in these few days. Now it completely erupted. In just a moment, the evil poison of the fertility-severing hand had already disappeared completely, and Du Huang lost his consciousness due to the aphrodisiac. Chu Yang's face was full of black lines, and he urged, What are you waiting for? The two martial saints, Bai Wuji and Zitung, were stunned by Huang Xiaoyou's words. They hadn't come back to their senses yet, and they asked, What? Quickly send him to the bridal chamber. Chu Yang stomped his feet and roared anxiously. Oh! The two martial saints seemed to have just woken up from a dream. They grabbed Huang Xiaoyou, who was making threatening gestures, and flew into the backyard. Du Huang's urgent roar shook the heavens. Find me a brothel. Find me a few chicks. Everyone's face was full of black lines. Du Huang's wolf-like cries had been ringing for the whole afternoon. Even though the two martial saints tried their best to isolate the sound with their own cultivation, they still couldn't control Du Huang's extremely excited cries. It's too embarrassing. The two martial saints stood in the courtyard with their faces and ears red. Their faces were as red as a monkey's butt. 2 whole days passed. Only then did Du Huang's snoring sound come from his room. It's finally over. The two martial saints wiped off their cold sweat. Looking at Chu Yang, who had a faint smile on his face, they bowed and said, Divine Dr. Chu, our Huang clan will never forget Divine Dr. Chu's great kindness. Chu Yang laughed mischievously. Never forget? That's very good. Ha ha ha. To be continued. Chapter 853. Part 7, Chapter 120 Departure. Huang Xiaoyou eventually left the purple crystal's Huichun Hall with his men. Chu Yang looked at Huang Xiaoyou's departure and couldn't tell what he felt. This foppish, flamboyant, dissolute, and ridiculous man was finally gone. However, the words he said before he left had touched Chu Yang's heart. Thank you, boss. From today onwards, I'm complete. Before Huang Xiaoyou left, he knelt down and kowtowed to Chu Yang respectfully. I'm not kowtowing for myself, but for the future generations of the Huang clan. I know that you don't like me, and I also look down on my past self, because I can't see any hope. When a man can't even do the least things that a man should do, hope will no longer be his hope. Everyone looks down on me, including my father and mother. They dote on me and love me, but they look down on me. I'm just a tool to carry on the family line. They won't place any hope on me. But boss, you think highly of me. Although you torment me, you treat me as a human, and not as a tool. So, during this period of time, I've drunk bitter, smelly and sour things, but I'm very happy in my heart. Because I'm not a tool here. I'm a patient. Although I'm a patient, I'm a human. Unfortunately, I also want to recover quickly, or else I really want to continue living here. Now I'm going back. My body and aptitude aren't good. So, when I go back this time, I still don't know how to be a human, but I'll do my best to be a tool to carry on the family line. Although I'll feel uncomfortable, I know what I can do. Boss, take care. Huang Xiaoyou will repay your kindness for the rest of my life. Huang Xiaoyou left. The purple crystal's Huichun Hall quieted down from the chaos. Before Huang Xiaoyou left, Chu Yang only said one sentence. Actually, it doesn't matter what others think of you. The problem is, you just have to think of yourself as a human. At that time, Huang Xiaoyou's eyes lit up. After Huang Xiaoyou left, Chu Yang smiled and thought for a long time. Finally he said, Huang Xiaoyou is actually quite cute. Then he stroked Chu Luer's hair and said, actually, what everyone needs is respect. But we are destined to be unable to give everyone respect. Chu Luer looked at him in confusion. Big brother, what are you talking about? Chu Yang laughed. It's good that you don't understand. He laughed heartily as he walked into the Purple Crystal's Huichun Hall. Chu Luer looked at his back view in confusion. She couldn't understand what Chu Yang meant at all. The purple cloud pill has been refined. The sword spirit transmitted this message in his mind. Chu Yang was overjoyed. How much? The sword spirit smiled proudly. 10. 10 more than I had estimated. Chu Yang chuckled. Suddenly his whole body relaxed. Of the 10 purple cloud pills, he would take 20 for himself and leave the remaining 40 for his family. That would be enough for his family to nurture 20 super experts. These 20 experts would be the safety of the Chu clan. If he went out, he wouldn't have to be on tenterhooks. Chu Yang quietly entered Chu Xiaoxin's small courtyard at midnight. He handed the 40 purple cloud pills to Chu Xiaoxin personally. This is the purple cloud pill. Every pill can raise a monarch-level expert's cultivation by 500 years. Chu Yang's first sentence made Chu Xiaoxin stand up in shock. What? Chu Xiaoxin looked at the purple crystal jade bottle in his hands, his eyes round. This was the first time in so many years that Chu Xiaoxin was so surprised. The legendary purple cloud pill was the ultimate secret for the law enforcement officers to nurture experts. Of course, Chu Xiaoxin knew about the effects of the purple cloud pill. But he didn't expect Chu Yang to get 40 of them at once. I've calculated carefully. The Chu clan now has 10 monarch-level experts and 2 martial saint-level experts. Chu Yang said, so I've allocated 2 pills to each of them. That is to say, each of them can raise their cultivation by 1,000 years. Chu Xiaoxin's face was dull. As for the other 4 pills, they're for third uncle and fourth uncle. Third uncle isn't at home, so I don't know his current cultivation. Third uncle's cultivation hasn't reached the monarch level yet, so he can't take them yet. He can only prepare them in advance. This purple cloud pill must be guarded by an absolute expert to ensure that the person who takes it will be safe. The only one who fulfills this condition is you, elder, Chu Yang said softly. Chu Xiaoxin raised his head and exhaled deeply. I understand what you mean. Although I'm unwilling, this is after all an opportunity for our Chu clan to rise up completely. Chu Yang smiled. So, I can only rest assured if you're watching over me. Chu Xiaoxin stood still in a daze. He understood what Chu Yang meant. To take the purple cloud pill, one must be guarded by a supreme martial artist. But he wasn't a supreme martial artist yet. So he had to raise his cultivation in the shortest time possible. This was tantamount to breaking his unending persistence, completely shattering his wish to die with the world after drinking the tea. But this was the purple cloud pill. Maybe the Chu clan would really rise up because of this opportunity and become the master of the heavenly layer, or a force like the great clan. This was the deepest wish of the Chu clan's ancestors. The most beautiful yearning. How could he give it up? From today onwards, I'm prepared to go through the Black Pine Forest, cross the Black River, enter the Qingyang Mountain, and all the way out of the southeast. I'll travel the world and increase my strength, Chu Yang said quietly. I won't be able to grow up if I only stay in this flat mountain ridge. Chu Xiaoxin nodded slowly. Okay. I'll take Luer with me, Chu Yang said. Her illness can't be delayed. I'll bring all the medicines and go out to find the last ones. Once I've found all of them, I'll treat her on the spot. Okay. Chu Xiaoxin nodded and agreed. It's best to take the purple cloud pill 1 month after I leave, Chu Yang reminded. You don't want people to know that this has something to do with you? Chu Xiaoxin finally turned to look at him. Yes, Chu Yang said affirmatively. Good. Chu Xiaoxin nodded slowly with a heavy heart. The two became silent at the same time. They stopped talking. After a full hour, Chu Yang said in a low voice, Elder, do you have any other instructions? Chu Xiaoxin walked slowly to the wall and stood still. With his hands behind his back, he raised his head and stared at the portrait of his deceased wife on the wall for a long time. His eyes were filled with helplessness and passion. After a long time he said softly, "This time you mustn't be soft-hearted. With me in the Chu clan, you can rest assured." Chu Xiaoxin's figure stood tall, with his hands behind his back and his back facing Chu Yang. He didn't look back. His expression was bleak and lonely. But then a kind of aura of supremacy rose up. He said slowly, "Even if the Xiao clan attacks with all their strength, I can also ensure that the Chu clan won't fall." His body suddenly emitted a crisscrossing seven-colored light, as if he was suddenly burned by a seven-colored flame. His cultivation, which had been stagnant for a long time, and had been forcibly suppressed and sealed by himself, began to recover vigorously. "I'm sorry, Elder." Chu Yang stood up and bowed deeply. He knew how reluctant Chu Xiaoxin was to make such a decision to raise his cultivation. Chu Xiaoxin said lightly, "I'm from the Chu clan." Chu Yang straightened up. Until Chu Yang walked out, Chu Xiaoxin didn't turn back. His aura rose crazily, and his power rose crazily, but his eyes were still staring affectionately at the portrait on the wall. Just like that, he continued to stand there and watch. The spiritual energy of the universe above the entire flat mountain ridge began to gather violently, condensing towards this desolate little courtyard. Chu Xiaoxin's clothes fluttered even though there was no wind. With his hands behind his back, his expression didn't change. But his aura became more and more terrifying, until it was oppressive. Chu Yang returned to his parents' courtyard. He told his mother, Yang Ruolin, about his plans. Although Yang Ruolin was reluctant and worried, she knew that her son was telling the truth. After confirming that Chu Yang's strength had completely recovered, Yang Ruolin agreed helplessly. Then she informed Chu Luer's mother, Duan Shi. The two clans decided to send Chu Yang and Chu Luer off the next day. The two mothers talked to their children for the whole night. In the early morning, when Chu Yang walked out of his mother's room, he felt that his shoulders were wet. Those were his mother's tears. On this day, the two mothers were arranging their children's necessities for the trip. They even prepared mosquito-repellent incense for the night. Each of them even had a big bag of shoes and clothes. Seeing that the carriage was almost full, the two mothers still felt that there were many things that they didn't put in. On the morning of the third day, the carriage stopped at the entrance of the Chu family's house. Two majestic black horses were harnessed energetically. Chu Yang and Chu Luer stood at the door. Chu Xiongqing and the others also stood at the door, looking at the two of them with complicated expressions. Yang Ruolin walked up, her eyes full of reluctance. She tiptoed and tidied her son's hair, headscarf and clothes. Then, she took 2 steps back, sized him up, and went forward to tidy him up. Her hands were trembling quietly, and so were her lips. But she didn't say anything. Duan Shi was also doing the same at the side. After a long time, seeing that time had passed and the sun had shone brightly, Yang Ruolin finally took a step back. Looking at her son in front of her, her eyes quickly turned red. She took 2 steps forward again, stretched out her hands, and quietly hugged her son in her arms. Chu Yang was tall. Yang Ruolin was considered tall among girls, but Chu Yang was still taller than her by a head. Yang Ruolin pressed her face against her son's chest, as if listening to his heartbeat carefully. Finally, she took a step back quietly. Her eyes were red, but she smiled faintly and said softly, "Come back early when you're done playing outside." Chu Yang nodded heavily. Yang Ruolin took 3 steps back and smiled faintly. "Let's go." Chu Yang and Chu Luer knelt down and kowtowed. Then they stood up. Chu Luer's eyes were red, and she pursed her lips as she entered the carriage. Chu Yang leaped up and got on the horse. With a whip, the 2 horses started to move at the same time. The carriage started to move slowly, gradually accelerating. Chu Yang didn't dare to stay any longer, and he didn't dare to turn back. He was afraid that if he turned back, he would melt in his mother's eyes, and he wouldn't bear to leave anymore. The carriage turned the corner smoothly but quickly, disappearing from everyone's sight. Yang Ruolin was still waving her hands. After a long time, when the dust had settled, Yang Ruolin quietly put down her hands. She only felt that her heart was suddenly empty. The tears that she had been holding back finally came out. She covered her face with her hands and ran into the door. Yang, when will you come back? It's past 4 o'clock now. I'm afraid that I won't be able to come out by the 4th o'clock. I'll have to come back around 5:30 or 6 o'clock. At hashtag. Chapter 854. Just as Chu Yang was about to walk out of the flat mountain ridge, the originally sunny weather suddenly turned dark and cloudy all of a sudden. Dark clouds gathered from all directions as fast as lightning, gathering above the Chu clan, as if they were running for their lives. The dark clouds in the sky became denser and denser. They rotated slowly and pressed lower and lower. A vortex suddenly appeared in the clouds in the sky. The vortex became more and more rapid. Gradually it formed a huge eye. With the sound of a thunderclap, a thick, curved bolt of lightning suddenly wedged itself into the Chu family. With a boom, the earth shook violently. Then, the lightning in the sky was like a silver snake dancing wildly, crazily striking down without stopping. Chu Yang stood on the horse's back and looked into the distance. He asked in bewilderment, "What happened?" The sword spirit smiled calmly. Chu Xiaoxin has broken through to the supreme martial artist level. In the Chu clan, in that small courtyard full of thatch, in that low thatch house, Chu Xiaoxin stood quietly in front of the portrait with his hands behind his back. His eyes were affectionate and focused. Lightning struck down. Chu Xiaoxin looked at the woman in the portrait who was smiling gently. His face was bitter and painful. He closed his eyes and said softly, "I'm sorry. I can't go and find you at that time." The lightning struck down and lit up the whole world that was shrouded in dark clouds. The roof of the thatched hut suddenly disappeared. That lightning struck right on top of Chu Xiaoxin's head. Chu Xiaoxin stood with his eyes closed. A teardrop flowed out from his eyes. Even though the lightning struck down, he was safe and sound. It was just that his expression became more and more painful. That was the pain and contradiction in his heart. Lightning struck down crazily on top of his head one after another. Then it dissipated. He stood still with his hands behind his back. He was enduring the baptism of the power of heaven and earth. He opened his eyes and looked at the portrait in front of him. The lightning bolts danced wildly, and the portrait moved slightly. The clothes of the woman in the portrait fluttered in the wind. Her eyes were bright, and her teeth were white. Her eyes were affectionate, and she seemed to be talking to him. Chu Xiaoxin groaned painfully and said, "Are you okay?" The portrait floated up. Her eyes were gentle. "Aren't you okay?" Chu Xiaoxin asked painfully. The eyes of the portrait were gentle, and the expression was gentle. It floated up gently, as if it was denying it. Lightning, accompanied by the rumbling of thunder, exploded above his head. Suddenly, a strong wind blew and torrential rain poured down. However, not a single drop of rain fell within 3 feet of Chu Xiaoxin and the portrait. "Do you blame me?" Chu Xiaoxin continued to ask. The portrait seemed to be deep in thought. Then, a gust of wind blew and the portrait fluttered. The clothes of the person in the portrait fluttered, and the gaze in her eyes seemed to become tender and affectionate. Chu Xiaoxin let out a long sigh. "I've missed you so much all these years." All of a sudden, he let out a long howl and raised his head. His long hair stood on end, and he opened his arms. Facing the might of the thunder and lightning that filled the sky, he shouted with a heart-wrenching voice, "I miss you so much." His voice was filled with sorrow, helplessness, longing and despair. It turned into a thunderous roar in the sky. Dozens of lightning bolts rained down on his head like a string of pearls. It smashed down. The entire earth was shaking violently. At the boundary of flat mountain ridge, Chu Yang stood on a high slope and looked into the distance. That heart-wrenching shout came from afar. Chu Yang stood solemnly and said silently in his heart, "Elder Master, it's been hard on you." The sword spirit was also feeling the artistic conception. He said deeply, "Have you heard it?" Chu Yang said, "What?" The sword spirit sighed and said, "Have you heard the pain of the path of emotions?" Chu Yang stared in the direction of the thunder and lightning and said deeply, "The pain is because you've been too happy in the past. As long as you've had such unforgettable happiness in your life, even if you're in pain now, you're still happy." The sword spirit became silent. The thunder and lightning stopped. The dark clouds in the sky dissipated quickly and scattered in all directions. In the blink of an eye, The sun shone again and the mountains and rivers were beautiful. Chu Yang got on the horse and shouted, "Go!" The horse raised its hooves and went away with a long neigh. Inside the carriage, the frail Chula was leaning against the soft bedding. Her eyes were red, and her fair hands were gripping the armrest tightly. Her knuckles were turning white from gripping it so tightly that they were turning white. This time, she would follow her elder brother into an unknown journey of life. The little girl's heart was full of sorrow, confusion and excitement. She just didn't know what was waiting for her along the way. In the law enforcement hall of Flat Mountain Ridge, Sha Xinliang and Qin Baoshan stood on a high point and looked up. "Little brother has set off," Sha Xinliang said with a hoarse voice. "Little brother shouldn't be restrained in this flat mountain ridge," Qin Baoshan said with his hands behind his back. "His world should be the heavens." Sha Xinliang laughed. "We'll meet little brother again in this martial world one day," Qin Baoshan said affirmatively. "I have this feeling." Sha Xinliang sighed and said, "Yes, law enforcement master has helped us improve our strength. He won't let us stay here." The two looked at each other and smiled. They were both thinking, what will it be like when we meet the law enforcement master and little brother next time? The carriage sped past, leaving a long trail of smoke on the mountain road. Chu Yang rode on the horse quietly. He was motionless and his back was straight. His whole body was like a sharp sword erected on the horse. He was dressed in black. His eyebrows were sword-like, and his black hair was floating behind his head. His face was cold and motionless. His eyes were focused and vigilant. The carriage had been moving forward quickly for 6 hours. Chu Yang didn't say anything. It seemed that he could use this posture and this speed to travel for thousands of miles. The sun was already high up in the sky. In front of him, there was a patch of black. Chu Yang's eyes were dignified. He used his hand to cover his eyes and looked over. It seemed that the pine trees on that side of the mountain were darker and darker in color. They were also denser than this side of the mountain. This should be the Black Pine Mountain Ridge. We'll reach the Black Pine Forest after we pass this 300 miles long mountain range. Chu Yang looked at the mountain in front of him seriously. The Black Pine Forest is the battlefield between the Xiao clan and the Huang clan. Chu Yang's brows were tightly knitted. With my current strength and with lure, wanting to cross this battlefield is no different from a fool's dream. But I must pass through it. We don't have to take this route. But if we don't, the journey will be 3 days longer. Moreover, I also want to see how the battle between the Xiao clan, the Huang clan and the Yi clan is like. Chu Yang shook his head and laughed self-mockingly. The carriage moved forward slowly and stopped under the shade of a tree. Chu Yang got off the horse and carried Chu Luer out. He placed her on the ground and said, "Be good and wait. I'll start cooking. I'll make sure you eat till your mouth is full of oil." Chu Luer looked a little tired and said, "But I'm starving." She patted her belly, blinked and smiled. "Big brother, how's your culinary skills?" "I'm the best chef in the heavens." Chu Yang neatly used a few stones to prop up the pot holder. Then he spread out his hands, and the spirit energy of the world gradually converged. It slowly formed into a mist. Then it changed into drops of clear water and entered the iron pot. That day when he saw Chu Xiaoxin using this method to make tea, he secretly learned it from him. Naturally, his speed was 1,000,000 times slower than Chu Xiaoxin's. However, with Chu Luer's current physical condition, she needed this kind of water to lift her spirits and nourish her body. Only then could she use some vitality spring water. A flame started burning at the bottom of the pot. While the water was boiling, Chu Yang quickly went out and came back with 2 plump wild rabbits in his hands. He cleaned them up quickly, skinned them and removed their bones. He set up a rack at one side and put on the wild rabbits. He skillfully applied various ingredients on them and started to roast them. When the water in the pot boiled, the wild rabbits on the rack were also roasted until they were tender and yellow. An alluring fragrance slowly spread out. The plump wild rabbits sizzled on the rack, and the oil from the roast dripped into the fire, making crackling sounds. However, it became even more fragrant. Chu Luer couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. She looked at the wild rabbits greedily and stuck out her little tongue to lick her lips. Obviously, this girl was craving for it. "It smells so good," Chu Luer said. Then he realized that at the same time as he spoke, someone else also said the same thing. Chu Yang was shocked. He looked up and saw a man in black standing quietly in the shadow 100 feet away. He wrinkled his nose and sniffed in the direction of the wild rabbits. This person wasn't far away, but Chu Yang didn't notice him. Although he was busy roasting the meat and was a little distracted with Chu Yang's spiritual energy, he didn't notice when this person came. This showed how powerful this person was. Chu Yang stood up and smiled warmly. "Brother, I think you haven't eaten yet. If I'm lucky, can I treat you to a meal?" That person looked at him and laughed with some interest. He said in a clear voice, "But I wonder how much this meal costs." Chu Yang smiled gently. "I think you can tell that although I'm not very rich, I'm not very short of money either. Little brother, you're very straightforward." The man in black laughed and walked over. This person looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He was tall and a little thin. His face was a little pale, as if he hadn't seen the sun for a long time. His eyes were gentle, and one couldn't tell that he had any cultivation. He was casually holding a tattered scabbard in his hand. There were already frayed edges on the edges of his black clothes. It was obvious that he had been wearing them for a long time, but they were very clean. This person's face was very ordinary, so ordinary that one wouldn't be able to recognize him if he was thrown into a crowd. But Chu Yang asked the sword spirit to observe carefully and confirmed that this person didn't disguise himself. This was his original appearance. "Little brother, what's your name?" This person greeted Chu Yang as if they were close friends. He casually stuffed a piece of firewood into the fire and smiled at Chu Luo. "Little girl, you're so pretty." Chu Luo blushed and hid beside Chu Yang. "My surname is Chu," Chu Yang said. "May I know your surname?" That person laughed. "My surname is Wei. You can call me Big Brother Wei." His brows relaxed as he looked at the wild rabbits on the fire. He seemed to be drooling. "It's really fragrant." Chu Yang's heart flashed. "Surname Wei? Expert? Who is he?" The 4th chapter was finally completed. I really didn't expect to stay up all night. I really can't afford to slow down my writing speed. Chapter 855. Just as Chu Yang was about to walk out of the flat mountain ridge, the originally sunny weather suddenly turned dark and cloudy all of a sudden. Dark clouds gathered from all directions as fast as lightning, gathering above the Chu clan, as if they were running for their lives. Laduo, the dark clouds in the sky became denser and denser. They rotated slowly and pressed lower and lower. A whirlpool suddenly appeared in the clouds in the sky. The whirlpool became more and more rapid, and gradually formed a huge eye. With the sound of a thunderclap, a thick curved bolt of lightning suddenly wedged itself into the Chu family. With a boom, the earth shook violently. Then, the lightning in the sky was like a silver snake dancing wildly, crazily striking down without stopping. Chu Yang stood on the horse's back and looked into the distance. He asked in bewilderment, "What happened?" The sword spirit smiled calmly. "Chu Xiaoxin has broken through to the supreme martial artist level. In the Chu clan, in that small courtyard full of thatch, in that low thatch house." Chu Xiaoxin stood quietly in front of the portrait with his hands behind his back. His eyes were affectionate and focused. Lightning struck down. Chu Xiaoxin looked at the woman in the portrait who was smiling gently. His face was bitter and painful. He closed his eyes and said softly, "I'm sorry. I can't go and find you at that time." Lightning crashed down, illuminating the entire world that was shrouded in dark clouds with a blazing white light. The roof of the thatched hut suddenly disappeared. That lightning struck right on top of Chu Xiaoxin's head. Chu Xiaoxin stood with his eyes closed. A teardrop flowed out from his eyes. He was safe and sound even though the lightning struck him, but his expression became more and more painful. That was the pain and contradiction in his heart. Lightning struck down crazily on top of his head, and then dissipated. He stood still with his hands behind his back. He was enduring the baptism of the power of heaven and earth. He opened his eyes and looked at the portrait in front of him. The lightning bolts danced wildly, and the portrait moved slightly. The clothes of the woman in the portrait fluttered in the wind. Her eyes were bright, and her teeth were white. Her eyes were affectionate, and she seemed to be talking to him. Chu Xiaoxin groaned painfully and said, "Are you okay?" The portrait floated up. Her eyes were gentle. "Aren't you okay?" Chu Xiaoxin asked with heartache. The eyes of the portrait were gentle, and the expression was gentle. It floated up gently, as if it was denying it. Lightning, accompanied by the rumbling of thunder, exploded above his head. Suddenly, a strong wind blew and torrential rain poured down. However, not a single drop of rain fell within 3 feet of Chu Xiaoxin and the portrait. "Do you blame me?" Chu Xiaoxin continued to ask. The portrait seemed to be deep in thought. Then a gust of wind blew and the portrait fluttered. The clothes of the person in the portrait fluttered, and the gaze in her eyes seemed to become tender and affectionate. Chu Xiaoxin let out a long sigh. "I've missed you so much all these years." All of a sudden, he let out a long howl and raised his head. His long hair stood on end, and he opened his arms. Facing the might of the thunder and lightning that filled the sky, he shouted with a heart-wrenching voice, "I miss you so much." His voice was filled with sorrow, helplessness, longing and despair. It turned into a thunderous roar in the sky. Dozens of lightning bolts rained down on his head like a string of pearls. It smashed down. The entire earth was shaking violently. At the boundary of flat mountain ridge, Chu Yang stood on a high slope and looked into the distance. That heart-wrenching shout came from afar. Chu Yang stood solemnly and said silently in his heart, "Elder Master, it's been hard on you." The sword spirit was also feeling the artistic conception. He said deeply, "Have you heard it?" Chu Yang said, "What?" The sword spirit sighed and said, "Have you heard the pain of the path of emotions?" Chu Yang stared in the direction of the thunder and lightning and said deeply, "The pain is because you've been too happy in the past. As long as you've had such unforgettable happiness in your life, even if you're in pain now, you're still happy." The sword spirit became silent. The thunder and lightning stopped. The dark clouds in the sky dissipated quickly and scattered in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the sun shone again, and the mountains and rivers were beautiful. Chu Yang got on the horse and shouted, "Go!" The horse raised its hooves and went away with a long neigh. Inside the carriage, the frail Chu Luo was leaning against the soft bedding. Her eyes were red, and her fair hands were gripping the armrest tightly. Her knuckles were turning white from gripping it so tightly that they were turning white. She was going to follow her elder brother into an unknown journey of life. The little girl's heart was full of sorrow, confusion and excitement. She just didn't know what was waiting for her along the way. In the law enforcement hall of Flat Mountain Ridge, Sha Xinliang and Qin Baoshan stood on a high point and looked up. "Little brother has set off," Sha Xinliang said with a hoarse voice. "Little brother shouldn't be restrained in this flat mountain ridge," Qin Baoshan said with his hands behind his back. "His world should be the heavens." Sha Xinliang laughed. "One day, we'll meet little brother again in this martial world," Qin Baoshan said affirmatively. "I have this feeling." Sha Xinliang sighed and said, "Yes, law enforcement master has helped us improve our strength. He won't let us stay here." The two looked at each other and smiled. They were both thinking, what will it be like when we meet the law enforcement master and little brother next time? The carriage sped past, leaving a long trail of smoke on the mountain road. Chu Yang rode on the horse quietly and motionlessly. His back was straight, and his whole body was like a sharp sword erected on the horse. He was dressed in black. His eyebrows were sword-like, and his black hair floated behind his head. His face was cold and motionless. His eyes were focused and vigilant. The carriage had been moving forward quickly for 6 hours. Chu Yang didn't say anything. It seemed that he could use this posture and this speed to travel for thousands of miles. The sun was already high up in the sky. In front of him there was a patch of black. Chu Yang's eyes were dignified. He used his hand to cover his eyes and looked over. It seemed that the pine trees on that side of the mountain were darker and darker in color. They were also denser than this side of the mountain. This should be the Black Pine Mountain Ridge. We'll reach the Black Pine Forest after we pass this 300 miles mountain range. Chu Yang looked at the mountain in front of him with a heavy expression. The Black Pine Forest is the battlefield between the Shao clan and the Huang clan. Chu Yang frowned. With my current strength, it's no different from a fool's dream to pass through this battlefield with lure, but I must pass through it. We don't have to take this route. But if we don't, the journey will be 3 days longer. Besides, I also want to see how the battle between the Xiao clan, the Huang clan and the Yi clan is like. Chu Yang shook his head and laughed self-mockingly. The carriage moved forward slowly and stopped under the shade of a tree. Chu Yang got down from the horse and carried Chu Luer out. He placed her on the ground and said, "Be good and wait. I'll start cooking. I'll make sure you eat till your mouth is full of oil." Chu Luer looked a little tired and said, "But I'm starving." She patted her belly, blinked and smiled. "Big brother, how's your culinary skills? I'm the best chef in the heavens." Chu Yang neatly used a few stones to prop up the pot holder. Then, he spread out his hands, and the spirit energy of the world gradually converged. It slowly formed into a mist, and finally turned into drops of clear water, and entered the iron pot. He secretly learned this from Chu Xiaoxin that day when he saw him using this method to make tea. Naturally, his speed was thousands of times slower than Chu Xiaoxin's. However, with Chu Luer's current physical condition, she needed this kind of water to lift her spirits and nourish her body. Only then could she use some vitality spring water. A flame started burning at the bottom of the pot. While the water was boiling, Chu Yang quickly went out. After a while he came back with 2 plump wild rabbits. He cleaned them up quickly, skinned and deboned them. Then, he set up a rack at one side, put on the wild rabbits and skillfully smeared various ingredients on them. Then he started to roast them. When the water in the pot boiled, the wild rabbits on the rack were also roasted until they were tender and yellow. An alluring fragrance slowly spread out. The plump wild rabbits sizzled on the rack. Drops of oil from the roasting dripped into the fire, making crackling sounds. However, the fragrance became even more fragrant. Chu Luer couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. She looked at the wild rabbits greedily, and stuck out her little tongue to lick her lips. Obviously this girl was craving for it. "It smells so good," Chu Luer said. Then he realized that at the same time as he spoke, someone else also said the same thing. Chu Yang was shocked. He looked up and saw a man in black standing quietly in the shadow 100 feet away. He wrinkled his nose and sniffed in the direction of the wild rabbits. This person wasn't far away, but Chu Yang didn't notice him. Although he was busy roasting the meat and was a little distracted with Chu Yang's spiritual energy, he didn't notice when this person came. This showed how powerful this person was. Chu Yang stood up and smiled warmly. "Brother, I think you haven't eaten yet. If I'm lucky, can I treat you to a meal?" That person looked at him and laughed with some interest. He said in a clear voice, "But I wonder how much this meal costs." Chu Yang smiled gently. "I think you can tell that although I'm not very rich, I'm not very short of money either. Little brother, you're very straightforward." The man in black laughed and walked over. This person looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He was tall and a little thin. His face was a little pale, as if he hadn't seen the sun for a long time. His eyes were gentle, and one couldn't tell that he had any cultivation at all. He was casually holding a tattered scabbard in his hand. There were already frayed edges on the edges of his black clothes. It was obvious that he had been wearing them for a long time, but they were very clean. This person's face was very ordinary, so ordinary that one wouldn't be able to recognize him if he was thrown into a crowd. But Chu Yang asked the sword spirit to observe carefully, and confirmed that this person didn't disguise himself. This was his original appearance. "Little brother, what's your name?" This person greeted Chu Yang as if they were close friends. He casually stuffed a piece of firewood into the fire and smiled at Chu Luer. "Little girl, you're really pretty." Chu Luer blushed and hid beside Chu Yang. "My surname is Chu," Chu Yang said. "May I know your surname?" That person laughed. "My surname is Wei. You can call me Big Brother Wei." His brows relaxed as he looked at the wild rabbit on the fire. He seemed to be drooling. "It smells really good." Chu Yang's heart flashed. Surname Wei. Expert? Who is he? The 4th chapter was finally completed. I really didn't expect it to be an all-nighter. I really can't afford to slow down my writing speed. Chapter 856. Finally, one of the roasted rabbits was removed from the fire rack. That person's and Chu Luer's gazes turned greedy. The two of them started rubbing their hands at the same time, their 4 eyes staring straight at the roasted rabbit that was sizzling. This was the most delicious piece. And from the looks of it, this was also the place where Chu Yang had put the most effort into roasting it. Without waiting for Chu Yang's instructions, that person had already taken the initiative to clean up a stone to make a dining table. Using his hand, the upper half of the stone disappeared and became as smooth as a mirror. Then, he wiped it with his sleeve. Good lord, it could be used as a mirror. It was so clean that even a fly would split its legs when standing on it. It was too smooth. Chu Yang placed the roasted rabbit on the stone table and said, "Don't move." Then he slowly stood up, walked into the carriage and slowly took out a jar of wine. Just as he was about to turn around, he suddenly heard a quarrel behind him. "Don't move!" Chu Luo screamed. "It's mine!" Chu Yang turned around and saw Chu Luo with her arms spread out in front of the roasted rabbit. Her big eyes were round and round as she looked at the man in black opposite her angrily. Her gaze was actually a little fierce. One could see that the man in black was retracting his right hand somewhat awkwardly. It was obvious that he was hesitant. He swallowed twice and said, "Where are the 2 buttocks?" What he meant was, "One for each of us." "No," Chu Luo said loudly. "The other one is my elder brother's." The man in black's face immediately fell. He looked at Chu Luo with a pleading gaze. Chu Luo said righteously, "It's no use pretending to be so pitiful. It's no use looking at me pitifully. Rabbits only have 2 buttocks, and there are 3 of us." Chu Yang laughed and turned around to walk back. The man in black retracted his hand resentfully and said, "This younger sister of yours is really fierce." Chu Luo snorted and turned her face away. "This younger sister of mine, as long as you don't snatch food from her, she has a better temper than anyone else," Chu Yang said with a smile. This sentence was obviously biased. The man in black was very dissatisfied. He thought to himself, "If I don't snatch food to eat, what should I snatch?" But in the blink of an eye, his dissatisfaction disappeared, and his eyes lit up. "There's wine. Good wine." Chu Yang smiled in a self-satisfied manner. He then opened the mud seal with his palm, and a rich wine aroma immediately spread out. The black-clothed man narrowed his eyes and took a deep breath. He opened his mouth and exhaled, "Good wine." It was as if he had already taken a sip. Chu Yang smiled in his heart. This wine is made by the sword spirit. Moreover, a small amount of vitality spring water has been added to it. How can it not be good? He put down the jar, took out 3 cups and poured 3 cups. The man in black stopped him. "Your sister is clearly sick, yet you still let her drink." Chu Yang was a little surprised. This guy has good eyesight. He can actually tell that Luo is sick? However, it was still a little lacking. He could not tell how much the wine nourished Luo's body. He said indifferently, "Other wines may not work, but this wine, drinking just 1 cup is not a problem. Moreover, it is beneficial." He thought that this man's heart was not bad. He washed his hands with wine, and the wine flowed down. The aroma was so strong that it almost condensed. The black-clothed man's heart ached so much that he bared his teeth. His face was almost a little ferocious as he said, "Such good wine. You're using it to wash your hands?" Chu Yang rolled his eyes and said, "If I don't wash my hands, I'll tear the rabbit for you. Do you dare to eat it?" The black-clothed man said, "But you can't use such good wine." Chu Yang ignored him. He took the roasted rabbit and directly tore off one of its legs. Under the black-clothed man's greedy gaze, he passed it to Chu Luo. The black-clothed man made a gulping sound in his throat. He looked at it reluctantly, and then at the other leg. With a tearing sound, Chu Yang tore off another piece and placed it in front of Chu Luo. "Eat slowly, don't choke." Chu Luo nodded happily and contentedly, chewing until her mouth was full of oil. The black-clothed man's eyes widened. He said angrily, "You treated me to a meal, but you gave both legs to your sister." As he said that, he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Chu Yang said, "Isn't there still a wild rabbit on the fire? Besides, a rabbit isn't small. After removing its internal organs, it's still 3 to 4 kilograms. So without both legs, it's still delicious everywhere else." The black-clothed man rolled his eyes and took a sip of wine. Immediately, the dissatisfaction on his face disappeared. He was about to reach out to take the rabbit. However, he saw that Chu Yang had already handed over the hare to him. Looking at the rabbit that was missing 2 legs, The black-clothed man hesitated for a moment and took it, full of indignation. As if he wanted to vent, he took a big bite. In just a moment, half of the wine was gone, and the wild rabbit was also in the black-clothed man's stomach. Chu Yang still didn't move. "Why aren't you eating?" The black-clothed man burped and asked. "I'm waiting for the next one." Chu Yang pointed and smiled. "That's the back of the rabbit." The black-clothed man choked. He put down the rabbit that was only left with a skeleton, and lowered his head to look at his stomach. Looking at the wine that was only half a jar left, he looked depressed. He was only focused on eating. At first he was still thinking about the next one. Later, the more he ate, the more fragrant it became. He was actually full. "You're ruthless." The black-clothed man stuck out a greasy thumb in front of Chu Yang. There was an indescribable depression in his heart. Chu Lua had a small appetite. After drinking a cup of wine, she couldn't even finish the 2 rabbits, and was already full. The second wild rabbit was finally roasted. Chu Yang eagerly tore off a rabbit leg, and handed it over. "Brother Wei, do you want to eat the rabbit leg?" The black-clothed man looked at it hatefully and snorted. He picked up the wine cup and drank helplessly. The more he drank, the more sullen he felt. Chu Yang drank one mouthful after another. He ate very slowly. The black-clothed man drank and accompanied them. He sighed again and again. Then, he suddenly burst into laughter and said, "I didn't expect that I would be so depressed after being treated to a meal. I haven't felt this way for many years. You 2 kids are really daring. I also didn't expect that someone would eat my food and drink my wine, and still be dissatisfied." Chu Yang was finally full. The 2 of them looked at each other and laughed. At this moment, they both felt that the other party was somewhat pleasing to the eye. Wherever the black-clothed man went in his life, everyone was respectful to him. When had he ever been humiliated? Today, the other party used the simplest method to make him feel helpless. Instead, he felt that it was novel. "Where are you 2 going?" the black-clothed man asked. "We're going to the capital." Chu Yang smiled. "Capital?" The black-clothed man frowned. "Just the 2 of you." Chu Yang said. "What's wrong?" The black-clothed man shook his head. "The 2 of you are purely delivering yourself to others. I don't know who will eat you on the way. I advise you to go back to where you came from." Chu Lua said indignantly. "My big brother is an expert." The black-clothed man was amused by her words. He looked at Chu Yang and said, "Although your cultivation isn't weak, with your cultivation of a 4th or 5th stage martial emperor, it's far from enough to bring your sister all the way from here to thousands of miles away." Chu Yang said lightly, "Whether it's enough or not, we can only take one step at a time." The black-clothed man pondered for a moment and said, "Forget it. I'm going to pass through the black pine forest anyway. Since I've eaten your meal, then follow me through the black pine forest. However, you'll have to walk the road after the black pine forest on your own." Chu Yang laughed. "No need. We can walk on our own. Since Brother Wei has something to do, it'll be delayed if you follow us." Although he had already vaguely guessed who this person was, he wouldn't curry favor with him because of his identity. Chu Yang was proud and arrogant. He had his own perseverance, and his perseverance wouldn't waver for anyone. The black-clothed man looked at him deeply and said, "If we walk together, I'll eat your meal along the way." He also saw Chu Yang's bad performance. However, he felt that this young man was very congenial and wanted to help him. "I'll eat your meal as a reward and escort you to the black pine forest." Although this sentence wasn't explicitly said, the meaning was already very obvious. He smiled bitterly in his heart. If someone knew that I've actually done such a task, they would be so shocked that their teeth would fall out. "No need." Chu Yang rejected. "We didn't bring much food. Moreover, a lot of it is for my younger sister's treatment. If there's one more person, I'm afraid it won't be enough." The black-clothed man frowned and felt a little helpless. He had been a loner all his life and had never owed anyone anything. Now that he had eaten a meal from someone else, he wanted to help out and let it go. After all, it was worth more than a meal. If it were anyone else, they would feel that treating him to a meal was worth it. However, he didn't expect the other party to reject him so straightforwardly. This made him feel a little uncomfortable. He laughed and said, Since little brother is so insistent, I'll take my leave. After eating your meal today, I'll definitely repay you in the future. He stood up lazily, and in a flash, he disappeared without a trace. Chu Luo watched the black-clothed man leave and asked curiously, "Big brother, why?" Chu Yang said, "Why what?" Chu Luo said puzzledly, "This black-clothed man is an expert. Moreover, Big brother's initial intention was to form a partnership with him. But in the end, when he offered to help, Big brother deliberately messed up this matter again." Chu Yang, he touched Chu Luo's hair and said, "Little girl, you're really observant." He pondered for a while and said, "This person is indeed an expert. But I don't want to owe others. Luo, we have to rely on ourselves for everything. We can't rely on others to protect us for our entire lives." Chu Luo nodded and rolled her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. Although Chu Yang said this, he knew that with Chu Luo's intelligence, she would definitely understand what he meant. He didn't say it, because the black-clothed man didn't go far. "I don't want to owe others, but I'm willing to let others owe me." He guessed who this black-clothed man was and naturally knew the legendary bad character of this black-clothed man. "Don't ask for help for anything. Don't owe anyone for anything. You ate my meal, and you want to repay me with something as simple as escorting me through the black pine forest. No one owes anyone anything from now on. How can there be such a cheap thing? You don't want to owe me, but I'll make you owe me, even if it's just a meal." A favor from the world's #1 blood payer expert is not easy to get. Chu Yang's eyes flickered. Yesterday, he was so tired that he slept until noon. After sending his comrades off, he came back and slept until 7 o'clock at night. Today's update will be late, but he still asked for monthly votes. Chapter 857. Chu Yang's guess was right. This man in black was the legendary #1 blood payer expert in the world, Wei Wuyan. Wei Wuyan. It was said that there was no blood payer mission that couldn't be completed by this person. As long as Wei Wuyan accepted the bounty of a blood payer, then the person on the bounty would definitely die. Wei Wuyan was famous for being mysterious. It was said that no one knew what Wei Wuyan looked like, and no one knew what level of cultivation Wei Wuyan had. The world's #1 painter, Su Danqing, had seen Wei Wuyan before. But when he wanted to draw a portrait of Wei Wuyan, he found that he couldn't draw at all. Every expert had their own charm and unique temperament. But Wei Wuyan didn't. Facing Wei Wuyan, Su Danqing actually fell into a daze. Because no matter what, he couldn't see anything special about Wei Wuyan. After Wei Wuyan left, Su Danqing locked himself in the studio for 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, he vomited blood and fainted, because not only could he not draw, but he also forgot what Wei Wuyan looked like the moment Wei Wuyan left. And he completely forgot. He had no impression at all. What was the most important thing for a painter? Wasn't it eyesight, memory, insight, and brushwork? These were the most basic things. Now that such a thing had happened, how could Su Danqing, the painter of his generation, not break down? The only time the Blood Payers Hall had offered a bounty for a supreme martial artist was completed by Wei Wuyan. Although he was only a first-grade supreme martial artist, Wei Wuyan's strength was daunting. Wei Wuyan was always alone. He had never fallen in love with anyone and never needed anyone's help. No matter how difficult the task was, he wouldn't ask for help. There was once a blood payer expert who was ranked #2 who contacted Wei Wuyan and wanted to cooperate with him, but was rejected by him. What everyone didn't expect was that although Wei Wuyan didn't ask for help in everything, he had a weakness. He was a foodie. However, although this food was delicious, he also had his principles. Firstly, no one knew his true identity. Secondly, as long as he ate a meal, he would repay them adequately. Therefore, although Wei Wuyan was delicious, he ate with a clear conscience. No one could refuse Wei Wuyan's repayment. Moreover, after being eaten by him, they would still have to thank him profusely. Wei Wuyan liked this feeling. But this time, he had miscalculated. He had never thought that Chu Yang would refuse. From his point of view, one of the siblings was sick, while the other's cultivation level was low. To pass through the Black Pine Forest and walk out of the southeast region, especially in this troubled period, this was simply an impossible task. Escorting them there was a good opportunity that ordinary people could not even dream of. Therefore, Wei Wuyan was invited to sit down without hesitation. Who would have thought that after eating Wei Wuyan, who had never owed anyone anything, actually owed someone a love? Under such circumstances, how could he really go far? Of course, he had to hide on one side. He thought to himself, even if you don't want me to escort you, I will quietly solve the problem for you. So I don't owe you anything. Then, he heard Chu Yang's words and immediately regretted it. Rely on yourself for everything, and never owe anyone anything. This is the creed of me, Wei Wuyan. Why did this little mouth say it? In an instant, Wei Wuyan only felt a little disappointed, but also a little sympathetic. After the meal, the two of them set off again. The cold autumn wind blew all the way. Chu Yang pretended not to know that Wei Wuyan was secretly following them. Of course, he was pretending to be confused. But Wei Wuyan had absolute confidence. With my cultivation level and stealth skills, even a high-level supreme martial artist might not be able to detect me if I follow them secretly. Otherwise, how could I complete so many Bloodpayers missions? But he would never have thought that this person, who was only a 4th or 5th stage martial emperor in his eyes, actually possessed a divine soul power that was unparalleled in the entire heavenly realm. In Chu Yang's visualization, Wei Wuyan, who thought that he was stealthily moving in the dark, was simply as dazzling as walking in front of the carriage openly. After walking for more than 20 miles, they finally met with trouble. Two black-clothed men caught up from behind like a gust of wind. They overtook the carriage like lightning. Then, one of them seemed to have thought of something and stopped blocking the road. The other one stopped as well. Just as he was wondering, the one who stopped first laughed strangely and said, "Little kid, what a handsome horse. Isn't it a pity to use it to pull the carriage? Come, come, come. Let me ride it on the road. It'll save some energy." These two men galloped all the way at an extremely fast speed. Originally, they didn't ride horses because they were confident that their speed was faster than fast horses. But now, seeing that they were only a few hundred miles away from their destination, they felt tired. Besides, they were going to risk their lives. How could they not conserve their energy? Since there was only such a short distance left, and they met such a carriage here, wouldn't it be a gift from the heavens to them? But these two men were really unlucky. They had persevered for thousands of miles. Why did they have to cause trouble in the last bit of the journey? It would have been fine if he had stopped. But he had sent both his legs into the depths of hell. Because they would never have thought that the people they had provoked were actually the king of hell of the present age. And they had provoked two of them at the same time. One in the open, and one in the dark. Wei Wuyan immediately became spirited. Looking at these two men, they should also be Bloodpayers experts who responded to the bounty offered by the Bloodpayers, and went to help the Huang clan earn purple crystals. Such a cultivation level wasn't something that this little kid could deal with. As long as the situation is critical, I'll take action at any time to repay the kindness of this meal. From now on, I don't owe anyone anything. Wei Wuyan was actually a little excited in his heart. Little kid, do you think that everyone can do it without owing anyone anything? You're wrong. Only those with strength can do it without asking for anything. Chu Yang's eyes were cold as he looked at these two men. Yes, their cultivation levels are not bad. They've both reached the first stage of monarch level. You want my horse? Chu Yang smiled. He sat on the horse and looked down at the two men. Although he was smiling, his expression was cold. The two men were used to being domineering. When they saw Chu Yang's contemptuous look, they immediately flew into a rage. Get down. Little brat, you're still pretending to be mysterious? It's your honor that I want your horse. Chu Yang smiled and suddenly floated down from the horse. Wei Wuyan, who was in the dark, was startled at the same time. Because as Chu Yang floated down, sword aura suddenly soared to the sky. A sharp sword intent was emitted from Chu Yang's body in a crisscross manner. The long swords at the waists of the two men automatically popped out of their sheaths, with a loud sword cry. There was actually a sense of excitement and exhilaration in the sword cry. The two long swords made of ordinary iron seemed to have been stimulated at this moment, when they faced the Sword King. A light flashed in midair, and Chu Yang had already turned into a stream of light. What harm is there in slaughtering everyone in the world? If it were other people, it might be possible to reason with them. Even if they were stronger than the other party, they could still patiently tease them before killing them. But in the face of such people, Chu Yang didn't even have the mood to say a word. He could only kill them. He wasn't interested in talking at all. Wei Wuyan, who was in the dark, almost popped his eyes out. Damn, he's actually a sword sovereign. And his level isn't low. This time, old Wei has really misjudged. Just now Wei Wuyan was caught off guard. Even his sword almost popped out. Luckily, Wei Wuyan was strong and reacted quickly. He suppressed his sword at the first moment and didn't expose himself. The two men were caught off guard. They immediately touched the sword hilt at their waists. But what they touched was the cold sword edge. Only then did they remember that their long swords had popped out automatically. Just with this slight hesitation, Chu Yang's sword light had already shot over like lightning. The two men felt cold when the sword light touched their bodies. Sword sovereign! The two men exclaimed at the same time. For a moment, they were both regretful. Motherfucker! I've been walking for thousands of miles and taking detours whenever I see something. Now that I've finally arrived here, I've actually offended a sword emperor in the last 200 to 300 miles. Why did you want to save your energy? The first man roared. He couldn't care less about the regret on his face. He retreated quickly and pulled out his sword. But just as he unsheathed his sword, the sword light from the other side had already arrived in front of him. Blocked. With a click, the sword that had just been unsheathed was cut into two pieces like a piece of wood. He exclaimed and retreated desperately. He shouted, "Domain!" A vacuum-sealed space appeared in front of him. In the dense forest, Wei Wuyan sighed deeply. He actually wants to use a domain to block a high-level sword sovereign. I don't know how this martial monarch is doing. He should be at least dozens of kilograms, if he's not dozens of years old. He's so ignorant. He could have escaped with his life. But once this domain appeared, both of us are finished. Wei Wuyan was a little depressed. Looks like I'm not needed again. Field. Chu Yang snorted coldly. His long sword continued to move forward. When it touched the sealed space, it burst like a soap bubble. The domain of a martial monarch was actually broken by a sword. That man spat out a mouthful of blood. His divine soul was seriously injured. He desperately dodged to one side. The long sword rushed past him with a sharp whistle. Blood flew like rain. Half of his body was already stained with blood. With just one sword, his left arm had disappeared and turned into minced meat. Even two ribs on his left chest were broken. A large piece of flesh was scraped off from the left side of his face. He staggered back and screamed inaudibly. His face had already turned pale. But Chu Yang's face was cold and hard. He didn't stop at all. The sword light flew up again. It was still the same move as before. What harm is there in slaughtering the whole world? Kill him while he's sick. The sword light was like a meteor. This man screamed. He couldn't care less about his serious injuries. He quickly rolled on the ground and desperately released hidden weapons to block Chu Yang. But he was facing a sword sovereign. Since he had lost the initiative and was seriously injured by his opponent, his ending was basically doomed. The sword light flashed. This man screamed in despair. Blood spurted out from his chest. He staggered and retreated. Chu Yang had already turned around like a whirlwind and rushed towards another person. In the dense forest, Wei Wuyan sighed deeply. His eyes were full of doubts. A fourth-grade sword sovereign who's not even 20 years old. How can there be such a genius in this world? Why haven't I heard of him before? To be continued. Chapter 858. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation first update. Another person came to his aid desperately with his sword. Chu Yang had just turned around when this person had already rushed to him. Just as this absolute defense was about to be launched, two rays of sword light had already met in the air. The thin swords clashed in the air and actually made a deafening sound, as if a big hammer had smashed on metal. Chu Yang's clothes fluttered behind him. He flew straight for more than 100 feet, his chest heaving up and down. This time, he had really clashed head-on with a monarch-level expert. Although Chu Yang had used his exquisite sword techniques to offset some of the power, His cultivation was still not as strong as the other parties. Latest chapter of the Holy Hall. That person rushed up with a hideous smile. Little one, is this all you've got? Chu Yang's face changed. His body shook, and he launched the fleeting snow cloud movement. Launching the fleeting snow cloud movement, with the strength of an emperor-level expert, he was really as agile as a swimming dragon. That person attacked repeatedly, but couldn't even touch Chu Yang's shadow. He couldn't help but feel more and more terrified. Chu Yang's sword light was faintly discernible. A feeling of extreme danger suddenly shrouded this person's heart. Sword energy suddenly erupted. Chu Yang defended for dozens of moves, and finally found an opportunity to turn from defense to offense. But who knew that just as he was about to launch his sword attack, he saw this guy suddenly fly back and rush in another direction. Chu Yang's pupil shrank. Over there, Chu Luer's head was sticking out of the carriage, and that person was rushing towards her. Wei Wuyan secretly rejoiced. He thought, it's finally my turn to attack. At this moment, Wei Wuyan suddenly felt a chill down his spine. His heart shook, and he looked over in horror. He saw that the sword light on Chu Yang's side had already turned into the scorching sun in the sky. Then, it turned into a long rainbow shooting through the sky. In a moment of desperation, Chu Yang directly used all his techniques. In the blink of an eye, the sword went from a single ray of cold light pierces 10,000 feet to you shall be worry-free as long as I'm alive. 10 moves were like a flash flood. Wei Wuyan saw a billowing storm coming towards him. The storm swept over the person who was speeding away. That person was still 70 to 80 feet away from Chu Luer. He did not even have the chance to scream before he turned into fragments that filled the sky. Net. The torrent surged and rushed toward the forest where Wei Wuyan was hiding. Wei Wuyan sighed gloomily. He lowered his body and sank 100 feet into the ground. The storm of sword energies swept across the woods with a loud rumble, directly plowing out a 50 feet wide and 400 to 500 feet long road. All the trees, not even a single root was left on the ground. They all turned into powder, filling the entire sky densely. Then they fell from the sky like snow, and it didn't stop for a long time. When Wei Wuyan crawled out from the ground, he found that Chu Yang had already driven the carriage far away. Voices came from afar. Big brother, you're so amazing. The little lowly's voice was filled with admiration. Of course, hearing these two words, one could imagine a certain someone's arrogant expression. You didn't even ask for their names before killing them. How terrifying, the little lowly said. It's meaningless to ask for a dead person's name. A certain someone was obviously enjoying the adoring gaze of the little lowly. He was a little arrogant. Well, no wonder you didn't let that black-robed man protect us, the little lowly said with a sudden realization. Ha 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 ha, I still have to protect him when I'm free. A certain someone boasted shamelessly. Wei Wuyan only felt that his stomach was bulging. He shook his body and shook off the dust on his body. There was actually a thick pile of dust at his feet. Wei Wuyan leaped up and was about to chase after Chu Yang. Now he was more and more interested in this Chu Yang. Wei Wuyan had a fortuitous encounter when he was young, and he was also taught by a famous teacher. He was already an emperor-level expert when he was only 20 years old. After that, he fought repeatedly and walked step by step to his current unshakable position in the bloody world. It could be said that his life was smooth sailing, but it could also be said that he had gone through a lot of hardships. But he asked himself honestly, when he was Chu Yang's age, he definitely didn't have Chu Yang's combat power. But at this moment, he frowned as if he had noticed something. A familiar aura appeared not far ahead. Sacred Hall the target this time. Wei Wuyan swept past like a gust of wind. This time, Wei Wuyan came to the Black Pine Forest not for the reward of the battle between the Huang clan and the Xiao clan, but because he had received news that his mission, which had been for half a year, had finally appeared in this area. That was why he came. The person that Wei Wuyan wanted to kill this time was Yinyang Bridge, Wan Renjia, a martial artist at the peak of the martial saint level, and the #1 thief in the southeast region. But he was given a nickname by all the heavenly layer martial artists, Wan Renjia. It was said that Wan Renjia was dissolute and shameless. His cultivation was high, and he appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Moreover, He specialized in intercepting the goods of law enforcement officers in big clans. As long as it belonged to law enforcement officers in big clans, even if it was a grain of rice, he would intercept it. But he didn't touch the other forces. He was a strange person. Wei Wuyan originally didn't want to kill Wan Renjia, but he urgently needed purple crystals this time. Wan Renjia's bounty had soared from 8,000 purple crystals all the way to 70,000 purple crystals today. This number made Wei Wuyan's heart palpitate. That was why he accepted it. But after chasing him for half a year and fighting him 3 times, Wan Renjia managed to escape. This time, Wei Wuyan made sufficient preparations. He swore not to let Wan Renjia escape from his hands again. Now Wan Renjia's unique aura finally appeared. Wei Wuyan was overjoyed. Speaking of which, he had to thank Chu Yang for this. If it wasn't for his strong sword aura that had aroused Wan Renjia's curiosity, it was really hard to say when he would be able to stop this guy. Wei Wuyan's body was like a black flowing light, flashing and disappearing. Chu Yang rode on the horse and chatted with Yu Chu and Lure all the way, luring Wei Wuyan to catch up. Suddenly, Chu Yang's whole body shook and his face changed. In his spiritual sense, there were 3 strong auras in front. Each of these 3 auras was almost not inferior to Han Shaoran. Chu Yang was shocked. Where did these 3 peerless experts come from in such a barren mountain? Among these 3 auras, one was very obvious, but the other 2 were very hidden. Just from the distribution of the auras, Chu Yang could analyze that this was a trap. One of them must have appeared as a bait to lure the enemy to attack, while the other 2 were lying in ambush at the side, ready to ambush. Chu Yang was puzzled. Is this the main battlefield of the Yi clan and the Shao clan? But, even if it's the main battlefield of the 2 clans, it's impossible to send out these 3 peerless experts at the same time. The current battle situation obviously hasn't reached the stage of sending out such experts. Sensing with his spiritual sense, Wei Wuyan suddenly accelerated and caught up with him like a flash of lightning. In an instant, he overtook the carriage and entered the dense forest ahead. Chu Yang was shocked. Wei Wuyan? The opponent's target is Wei Wuyan? But who is so resourceful to be able to grasp Wei Wuyan's whereabouts? But no matter what, this is really strange. Chu Yang pulled the reins and the horse stopped. Seeing that it was already afternoon, Chu Yang was silent for a while, and finally got down from the horse. He said, Lure, don't move. I'll go ahead and take a look. Something big must have happened in front. Chu Lure nodded obediently. Big brother, go ahead. I'm not afraid. Chu Yang chuckled and stopped the carriage. Then, he silently made a big hole between 2 big trees at the side of the carriage, and let Chu Lure hide in it. He used the 1000 Phantom technique to massage Chu Lure's blood, and let it stay in her body. In this way, as long as Chu Lure didn't crawl out, no one would be able to discover her hiding place. Then, he cleverly covered the top, and sprinkled a layer of topsoil. This place became a seamless hiding place. Even if someone discovered the carriage, they wouldn't discover Chu Lure. The carriage can be lost, but Lure can't be lost. Chu Yang thought. Lure, stay here and don't move. I'll be back soon, Chu Yang exhorted. Chu Lure nodded obediently. There were obviously 4 experts preparing for a decisive battle ahead. If he brought Chu Lure along, Chu Yang wasn't confident that he could protect her. But there was a road ahead that they had to pass through. So Chu Yang could only stop here. With his divine soul, he could feel that this place was outside the attack range. It was absolutely foolproof. Chu Yang rushed out of the dense forest and said in his consciousness space, Sword Spirit, I'm afraid I've caused you to possess my body this time. With my own strength, I'm afraid I'll be discovered by them before I reach the heart circle. The Sword Spirit chuckled. Then, the 2 of them changed their bodies without anyone noticing. The Sword Spirit controlled the body. The Sword Spirit's spiritual power and Chu Yang's spiritual power fused together and formed an incomparably powerful spiritual power. The black figure turned into a streamer in an instant. It shot forward. Wei Wuyan walked forward for 7 to 8 miles and suddenly stopped. On the roadside ahead, a man in green was standing with his hands behind his back. He nodded and smiled at Wei Wuyan. He had a graceful bearing. The corners of his face were protruding, and his eyes were as sharp as swords. His posture was tall and straight. Just by standing there, he was like an unshakable mountain. It was Wuxia. Wei Wuyan suddenly stopped from running at a high speed. His movements were as natural as moving clouds in flowing water. There wasn't the slightest bit of effort. His eyes became dangerous and sharp. Waiting for me? Wuxia turned around slowly. Wei Wuyan, long time no see. Wei Wuyan smiled faintly. Wuxia, are you here to deliver purple crystals for me? Wuxia said indifferently. As long as you can take it, it would be my honor to earn a few purple crystals for Brother Wei with my head. He rolled his eyes and said, I'm afraid that Brother Wei will overreach himself and step onto the Yinyang Bridge in my hands. Wei Wuyan chuckled. I've already seen the Yinyang Bridge. It's just so. Wuxia lowered his hands behind his back. When he raised them up, they were already in front of him. With a soft sound, a strange-shaped weapon appeared in his hands. This was a sword, but it was half as short and twice as wide as an ordinary sword. The sword blade was divided into two sides. One side was as white as snow, while the other side was as black as ink. Yinyang Bridge was not only Wuxia's nickname, but also the name of this sword. Black and white sword, Yinyang Bridge. Wei Wuyan's pupils contracted. Looking at this strange sword, he said in a low voice, This must be the famous Yinyang Bridge. I haven't seen it in the previous few battles. Today, I finally see it. It's indeed a murderous weapon. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.